They heard footsteps on the roof of the ranger station the night I stopped pretending the forest was just forest. I can still feel the weight of each step above me, slow, deliberate, as if something was testing the building for weak spots. People assume animals make noise in bursts, a scramble, a thump, a scurry, but this sounded like a person pacing, heel then toe, a shifting of balance, a pause right above where I sat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. My name, at least the one I still use on paper, is Daniel Reese. I've been a ranger for 19 years in districts most people drive past without seeing. No national parks, no glossy brochures, the places that don't show up on maps unless you zoom in until the land turns featureless and the roads change from white to thin gray. That's where the service sends people like me, rangers willing to take shifts the rookies can't handle and the veterans refuse. I used to believe I chose this life. Now I'm not sure if the land chose me instead, the same way it chooses some to keep and some to torment. Most of us who've been out here long enough have a story we never file in any report. Mine begins with a disappearance. One I still tell myself wasn't my fault, even though every instinct says otherwise. Her name was Lily Ward, 26, solo hiker. Last seen heading toward the Northern Basin Trails, a stretch of old logging roads and forgotten mining shafts. Forecast said clear skies, temperatures mild. It was supposed to be the safest weekend of the season. But safety is relative, especially out here. I was the responding ranger. I found her car still parked at the trailhead, keys on the floor, door slightly ajar. Inside, the smell hit first, something like wet stone and singed hair. Not the normal rot of forgotten food or damp gear. This was sharp, chemical, wrong. It clung to my uniform until I burned it months later. We never found her. We found her boot prints for a while, steady, confident, heading north along the old switchbacks. Then the prints changed. The stride shortened. The angle shifted inward like she'd started turning her feet without realizing it. Then the tracks split. One set continued forward. Another veered sharply into the brush, as if she had walked away from herself. We brought in dogs. They refused to follow either trail. They tucked their tails, whined, and pulled to go back to the trucks. A handler forced one dog to sit at the divergence point to sniff. The dog's ears flattened. He looked at the vegetation, then at the ground, then at the empty air beside me, and he growled at nothing. After that, we stopped using dogs in this district. I told myself it was a case of disorientation. Panic, maybe a fall into an old drainage hole. Rationalizations, those small lies rangers tell ourselves to avoid thinking about what else might be out there. But 2 months later, during a maintenance check of the northern fire tower, I climbed the last ladder section and found a message carved faintly into the metal platform. Human fingernails don't usually cut steel, but this wasn't scratching. It was pressed, dragged, like something had gripped the metal until it gave way. The message was crude, slanted, almost hesitant. Help me, I'm not alone down here. Down where? The tower had no underground. I filed nothing. I said nothing, but some nights when the wind pushed against the glass windows of the tower, the frame vibrated just enough that the steel whispering sounded like someone breathing. For months after, I avoided night shifts alone. Until the night, nobody else was available. The night, I heard the footsteps. The station sits 20 miles from the nearest paved road. The roof is metal, corrugated sheet panels that ping during hail and groan during cold snaps. Nothing can walk on it without making noise. It was almost 1 a.m., cold enough that frost rimed the inside corners of the windows. I was sorting radio logs when the first footstep struck above me. A dull, heavy impact, not a branch, not a pine cone. I waited for the second. It came 7 seconds later, then another. Closer. I radioed dispatch, but the signal crackled into static before I could speak. The power flickered. The lights dimmed, then steadied, then dimmed again, as if someone were gripping the line and squeezing. A slow scraping sound dragged across the roof, metal against something rough. My brain supplied reasonable explanations. Raccoon, cougar, black bear, maybe, but no part of me believed it. I've heard every kind of claw, pad, and hoof. This was something else. something with weight distribution too measured, too thoughtful. The steps stopped above the hallway leading to the bunk room. Silence stretched. I could hear my own breathing, shallow, uneven. Then I heard tapping. 3 taps, 2 taps, a longer pause. 1 tap, faint but sharp, like a signal, like a pattern. When the last tap landed, the radio turned on by itself. Not to a channel, not to a station, to a voice. At first, it was just whispering, low, tremoring. Male, maybe, or female, hard to tell. The words layered over each other, syllables swallowing other syllables. Then beneath that whisper came a second voice. Higher, softer, a voice I recognized and didn't want to recognize. It sounded like Lily, Daniel, just my name, drawn out in a rasp that vibrated the speaker. I froze. The footsteps above me started again, fast now like whoever was up there was running. The roof shook. Dust rained from the rafters. Something pounded at the metal, trying to break through. I grabbed my jacket, my sidearm, and a flashlight. I didn't want to go outside, but staying inside felt worse. I stepped out of the station and the cold hit me instantly. Unnatural cold, colder than the forecast by at least 20 degrees. Frost spidered over the ground in seconds. I pointed the flashlight at the roof. Nothing. But the metal still dented outward as if something invisible were moving on it. Then everything went still. A stillness so complete I could hear my pulse echo inside my skull. I should have called the other district office. I should have locked myself inside a vehicle and driven until the tires shredded. Instead, I stood there looking up because some part of me wanted to know, needed to know. The roof groaned, the metal bowed, and then I saw fingers wrap over the edge. Not human fingers. Too long, too thin, too many joints. They curled over the sheet metal like someone testing it for grip. The light from my flashlight flickered when it touched them, the beam bending the wrong way, like the air around the hand wasn't normal air. The fingers retreated in a quick snapping movement. Something crawled back across the roof, fast enough to rattle the whole structure. Then the sound stopped. No footsteps. No scraping. No whispering from the radio. Just silence. A silence that felt like breath held in the dark. I stood outside for almost a full minute, forcing myself to listen, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I saw. That's when the smell reached me. The same scent from Lily's car. Wet stone, singed hair. But this time stronger, fresher. It drifted from the tree line. A shape stood between the pines, tall, narrow, barely more than a silhouette. My flashlight touched it and the beam bent again, like the air around it refused to illuminate. It didn't move, it didn't approach, it just watched. And then it whispered, not with a mouth, with the air itself. Daniel. I stepped backward. My heel hit the station doorframe. I didn't dare look away from the silhouette, but I could physically feel, the pressure of the dark behind me pushing me inward. The smell grew stronger. My eyes watered. The silhouette tilted its head. Another head tilted behind it. Then another. Until there were 3 shapes. No footsteps, no sound of approaching. Just multiplying silhouettes, all standing too close together to make sense. One lifted its hand, the one that had been on my roof. I shut the door. The handle turned immediately. Not violently, calmly, slowly, like someone who believed they had all the time in the world. I held the lock so tightly my knuckles cracked. Something pressed its weight against the door, not enough to open it, just enough to remind me it was there. Then it spoke through the door. Not Lily's voice now, my own. Let me in. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I even blinked for more than a second at a time. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, my sidearm shaking in my hand, watching the windows for any sign of movement outside. But nothing moved. Not the trees, not the shadows, not even the damn wind. An hour passed, maybe 2. The clock on the wall kept ticking, but the seconds felt stretched, distorted. Every so often the temperature dipped sharply, frosting the inner panes of glass. Then it would rise again, like the whole cabin was breathing. I kept expecting to hear those footsteps return, or the tapping, or my own voice echoing back. But the forest had slipped into a silence so complete it felt like a vacuum. Around 4 a.m., the radio clicked back on. No static this time, just a recorded dispatch tone, followed by a calm, neutral voice. Ranger Reese, status check. Respond. I grabbed the receiver so fast I nearly ripped the cord from the unit. Dispatch, this is Reese. I swallowed hard. I've got an intruder outside the station. Unknown identity. It tried the door. I need backup. The reply came instantly. Reese, confirm, intruder? Physical person? I hesitated. I shouldn't have, but saying it out loud made it real. I don't know what it was. Silence. Then, Reese, backup ETA is 2 hours. Stay inside. Do not engage. Keep visual contact if possible. I stared at the windows. Negative. Visual is gone. Copy. But the tone of the dispatcher, calm, clipped, too quick, made something cold settle in my spine. It was the same tone used when they already knew the ending of a story and were just waiting to file it under unexplained, or missing. I stayed put until sunrise. I watched the first rays of light slip over the tree line, slow and syrup-thick through the frozen morning haze. When the world finally looked normal again, I stepped outside. The prints were the first thing I noticed. They covered the frost in a perfect circle around the station. Shallow impressions, almost human, but with a stride that made no anatomical sense. Some prints overlapped each other in directions no biped could make. Others were spaced too far apart. A few pointed directly toward the walls, as if someone had walked straight into the building and vanished. But the roof was worse. Every sheet of metal had small, perfect indentations, 5 in a row, evenly spaced, like fingertips pressed down with impossible strength. Not claw marks, not scratches, just the impression of something testing its weight. Testing me. I radioed dispatch again. You still sending backup? No hesitation this time. Negative, Reese. We've been advised to redirect units. Report all findings to District Command. Do not pursue. Redirect units. They were leaving me out here. I should have gotten in the truck and driven into town. I should have called in sick, taken a leave of absence, walked off the job. But the truth was, I'd been alone in this longer than I wanted to admit. And something in me still believed, hoped, that what happened was connected to Lily. That maybe she was alive somewhere. That maybe... No. That kind of hope is poison out here. Still, I needed answers. So I locked the station, checked the trail cams, and started hiking north, toward the old mining sites, toward where we lost Lily's trail. The morning light was thin, barely cutting through the fog. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of frost under my boots, the distant creak of branches, the faint whistle of wind through hollowed-out trunks. I kept telling myself it was normal, that the forest was always like this, that I'd just forgotten. But the smell followed me. That same stench from Lily's car. Wet stone, burnt hair. The odor drifted in patches, strong, then gone. Almost like someone was moving with me, but staying just out of sight. About 3 miles in, I reached the collapsed entrance of the old Ridgewell mine. It had been sealed decades ago after a cave-in killed 12 workers. No one maintained the area anymore. No one had reason to, except someone had been here. The boards covering the entrance were split, not pried, not cut, but bent outward, like something had pushed from inside. The nails were twisted, the wood peeled like paper. I aimed my flashlight inside. The beam disappeared 15 feet in, swallowed by blackness that didn't look like shadow, more like a wall of ink. The air coming from the opening was wrong, too warm, too still, carrying a low hum I felt more than heard. My radio crackled, just once, not static, not a voice. Breathing. I stepped back immediately. Dispatch, do you copy? Silence. I shut the radio off. The forest felt too close now, as if the trees had leaned inward to listen. The hum from the mine pulsed through the ground, vibrating up my legs into my ribs. My skin prickled with the instinctive recognition that something was watching. Then I saw it. A figure at the far end of the clearing, standing half hidden behind an old cedar stump, still. Too still. I raised my hand, trying to signal. Hello? This is restricted land. Identify yourself. No movement. Hey, I said identify. The figure slipped back behind the stump without taking a step. It didn't turn. It didn't shift. It just vanished, as if pulled straight backward by invisible hands. I walked toward the stump, heart pounding. The smell intensified. When I reached it, I found no footprints, no disturbed soil, nothing to show anyone had been there at all, except a piece of fabric caught on the bark, a hiking jacket sleeve, sun-faded, green. My stomach turned. I knew that jacket. Lily wore it the day she disappeared, and then I heard it, soft, faint, coming from behind me. The voice, not whispering this time, not distorted through radio static, just a simple, quiet plea. Fragile, human, help me. I spun around. The clearing was empty, but the mind was no longer silent. Something scraped deep inside, metal dragged across stone, slow and rhythmic, then 3 taps on rock. A pause. 2 taps, a longer pause. 1 tap, the same pattern from my roof. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I stepped closer to the mine. The hum intensified. The heat rolling out from inside grew suffocating. Sweat dripped down my neck despite the frost still on the ground. Then from the darkness, footsteps, slow, measured, getting closer. I raised my flashlight again. Stop. This is your final warning. The footsteps paused. Silence. Then a voice spoke from the darkness, not Lily's, mine. Come down, it said. You left me here. Something pressed against the inside of the mine planks, something with fingers. A handprint emerged in the dust on the boards, dragging downward slowly, leaving a streak of dark, wet grime. The hum deepened. The earth shuddered. And then, somewhere behind me, branches snapped. I turned too fast, lost my footing, and caught myself on my hands. The ground vibrated under me, tiny pulses like something burrowing beneath the soil. The footsteps in the mine grew louder, closer, coming straight toward the entrance. I stumbled to my feet and backed away. My flashlight flickered, then went dead completely. The clearing dimmed, as if the daylight were being swallowed. A shape emerged inside the mine. Tall, narrow, wrong. I didn't wait to see more. I ran, not toward the station, not toward the trail, just away, away from the mine, away from whatever was crawling out of it, away from the voice using my mouth. I didn't stop until the forest thinned and the station roof came into view through the trees, but something was waiting there. A shape on the roof, standing, watching, exactly where it had been the night before. It tilted its head as I approached, slowly, like it recognized me, and then it stepped backward into the roof, straight through the metal, like the building had swallowed it whole. I didn't go inside right away. I stood at the tree line, breathing hard, watching the station as if it were some animal pretending to sleep. The metal roof showed no sign that anything had stepped through it, no warping, no dents, nothing. Just a clean silver surface catching weak morning light. But the air around the building felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like sound didn't want to pass through it. The smell drifted again, or maybe it had never left. Wet stone, burnt hair, a faint hint of something metallic underneath. I wiped my eyes with the back of my sleeve. My tears stung. The odor burned. Part of me wondered if I was already too far in, if whatever had been pacing my roof had followed me to the mine, or if the mine had followed me back here. That's the thing nobody teaches you in ranger school. You can walk miles and return to the same place with something else walking your footsteps, wearing your shadow. Finally, I approached the station. My hand hesitated on the door handle. The metal was warm, warmer than it should have been in that cold morning, warm like breath, warm like skin. I pushed the door open. The interior looked exactly as I left it, neat, orderly, silent. But the silence felt like something holding its breath. Even the electricity sounded muted. No hum from the fridge, no buzz from the lights. Something had been in here. I could feel the absence, like a weight lifted just before I entered, leaving behind a cold displacement of air. I closed the door softly behind me and locked it, as if a simple deadbolt meant anything anymore. I checked every room, storage, bunk, comms, equipment. Everything looked untouched, except the radio. The mic was on the floor. Coiled cord stretched toward the desk as if someone had dropped it mid-sentence. The channel dial had been moved, not to any local frequency, not to a weather band. It was set between stations where only static should exist, except there was no static. Just breathing. Soft, measured, waiting. I bent down and picked up the mic without speaking. The breathing grew louder, as if whoever or whatever was on the other end could sense proximity. Then a faint tapping began on the other side of the speaker grill. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. I gripped the mic, swallowed, and forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" The breathing stopped. Then a voice spoke, so quietly I had to press the mic against my ear. "You know me." It sounded like Lily for a fraction of a second, then like me, then like something else, something without lungs or tongue or throat. I dropped the mic. The radio clicked off. I backed away until I hit the wall. My vision narrowed. My pulse hammered so violently, my fingertips went numb. This was too much, more than I could rationalize, more than I could process. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force logic into a situation that refused to be logical. When I opened them again, something new stood out. A single wet footprint on the station floor. Human. Bare. Fresh. It pointed toward the hallway. I followed it. I shouldn't have. I know that now. But curiosity doesn't feel like curiosity in situations like these. It feels like gravity, inevitable, consuming, pulling you forward even when your bones tell you to run the other direction. The footprint led to the bunk room. I pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit instantly, stronger than outside, as if the entire room had been steeped in it. The lights flickered, struggling against the dimness that clung to every corner. The footprint ended beneath the window. The window was open. Cold air blew in. Frost feathered the glass edges. The trees outside stood unnaturally straight, like they were listening. On the bunk mattress, something had been left for me. A map. My map. The one I pinned above the desk. The one the wind couldn't reach from here. It had been laid open, carefully, as if someone or something didn't want to damage it. The map showed the entire district. Trails, towers, access roads, drainages, ridges, except someone had drawn on it, with dirt or mud or something darker. 3 circles, one around the Ridgewell mine, one around the northern basin where Lily vanished, and one around the station itself, a perfect triangle. I stared at it, forcing my breath to stay even. My thoughts twisted, tangled. Patterns formed whether I wanted them to or not, connected points, movement, migration, traps. Whatever was out there, it didn't wander aimlessly. It moved with purpose, with geometry, with memory. My radio chirped again. I spun toward the hallway. This time the voice wasn't breathing. It was sobbing, a low, broken sound like someone crying into cupped hands. The kind of sobbing that comes from a place too deep to fake, too desperate to imitate. Lily. It had to be her. I rushed back to the radio, hands trembling. "Lily? Lily, is that you? Where are you?" The sobbing stopped instantly. Silence. Then, "You left me." The voice was wrong again, layered, distorted, like 3 versions speaking at once. One close, one distant, one impossibly deep. "I looked for you," I said through clenched teeth. "We searched for months." "No," the voice said. "You didn't." A harsh static burst cut through the speaker. My ears rang. The radio screen flickered unnaturally fast, numbers and symbols scrambling across it like it was trying to communicate in a language made of interference. Then the voice returned. "You're next." The radio powered down. The lights went with it. Instant darkness swallowed the station. I stood there, breathing fast, palms slick with sweat, hearing nothing but the frantic thud of my own heartbeat. Then, from somewhere inside that darkness, footsteps. Inside the station. Slow. Measured. Coming down the hallway. Toward me. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. Nothing happened. I shook it. Still nothing. The footsteps continued. Steady. Deliberate. The same cadence as the steps on my roof. Something brushed my arm. Cold. Wet. Not air. Not fabric. Flesh. I jerked backward and collided with the desk. My knee hit the edge hard enough to numb half my leg. Pain shot up my thigh. The footsteps stopped. They were inches away. I forced my hand toward the emergency lantern on the shelf. My fingers found the switch and flicked it. Pale yellow light snapped on, enough to illuminate half the room, enough to show one thing clearly. The hallway was empty. But the smell, God, the smell, hung in the air, thick as steam. My shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor, bending around corners like it was searching for me. I stayed frozen until the lights flickered back on and the station returned to its normal, quiet hum. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I knew that in my bones, something had entered with me, or something had left the mine and followed, or something had always been here, watching, waiting, learning my steps, my voice, my name. Around noon, my decision was made for me. I couldn't stay, not another hour, maybe not another day. I threw supplies into my pack, grabbed the truck keys, and stepped outside. The air was warm, unnaturally warm. Heat shimmered above the frost-coated grass, a contradiction that made my skin crawl. Then I heard something I hadn't heard since the first night. Tapping. Not from the roof this time, from beneath the soil. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. Coming from directly under my feet, the ground vibrated faintly. The earth was breathing. I bolted for the truck. As I reached for the door handle, something caught my eye. A figure, standing at the tree line, tall, still, head tilted, watching me with anticipation. It raised its hand, not waving, pointing at the ground beneath me, as if warning me or claiming me. I didn't wait to find out which. I threw myself into the truck, turned the ignition, and slammed the accelerator. The station shrank in the rearview mirror, but the heat stayed, the smell stayed, and when I checked the mirror again, the figure was gone, but something else was now visible. Wet footprints on the bed of my truck, as if someone had climbed in when I wasn't looking. I didn't stop driving for nearly an hour. Gravel spit from the tires as the road twisted through dense fir forest, each turn carving deeper into a part of the district I rarely visited. I kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see a shape rise from the truck bed. A hand, a head, something bending upward to look through the back window. But the bed remained empty. The footprints did not. They stayed wet, glossy, fresh, even as the wind should have dried them. Even as time should have erased them. Even when the temperature outside dropped sharply again, frosting the windshield in spiderweb patterns despite the heater running full blast, every instinct told me to stop the truck and get out. Like something was whispering beneath the engine noise. Not words, just an urging, a suggestion, a pull. But stopping meant stepping onto the ground again, and the ground had started tapping. I kept going. 27 minutes later, the tree line thinned and the terrain shifted into one of the old burn zones. Charcoal stumps, skeletal branches, wide exposure. A place where nothing could hide easily. For the first time since the mine, I felt a flicker of relief. Wide open land meant visibility. Visibility meant safety, or so I told myself. I slowed to a crawl near the old fire break and finally pulled over. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the keys. I stepped out slowly, boots crunching on the frost. The air was cold again, normal cold, without that strange heat that seemed to follow me from the station. The footprints in the truck bed were already fading, or sinking. The indents grew shallower, as if the bed was slowly erasing them. I backed away from the truck, scanning the entire clearing. Nothing moved. No silhouettes. No figures. No unnatural shadows stretching in the wrong directions. Just a pale sun hanging weakly over a dead forest. I finally felt like I could breathe, until the silence changed. Not a sound emerging, a sound disappearing. The wind. It stopped, instantly. The air held itself. The trees froze mid-creak. Even my breath felt suspended, like the world had been muted. That's when I noticed the burnt stumps around me were not in the same positions as last time I'd been out here. Nothing obvious, no impossible geometry, no bizarre rearrangements, just slight shifts, as if trees had been moved a few inches each, as if the land had adjusted itself subtly, like a sleeper rolling over without waking. I turned full circle. Every stump leaned just slightly toward me, watching, listening, waiting. I backed up toward the truck again, reached for the door handle. Then I heard it, a single footstep directly behind me. Close, human-sized. I spun around, gun drawn. Nothing. But the snow at my feet shifted, ever so slightly, as if a weight had lifted off it. Whispers drifted through the clearing, not from any direction, from all of them. Some were high, like children. Some were deep, like men with ruined throats. Some were layered, broken, like voices trying to merge but failing. And one sounded like Lily. Daniel, her voice carried a tremor, fear, pleading, something close to hope. I couldn't ignore it. "Where are you?" I yelled, turning toward the sound. Movement. Behind a stump, a pale hand slid into view. Small, human, trembling. My chest seized. "Lily?" The hand beckoned. Just once, then slipped back behind the stump. I didn't think, didn't consider, didn't question the impossibility. I ran to her, but when I rounded the stump, the clearing behind it was empty. Nothing but frostbitten ground and soot-black roots. But the smell hit me like a wave, wet stone and burnt hair so strong I gagged. I staggered backward, covering my nose, eyes watering. And that's when I saw something carved into the ground at my feet. Letters, clawed through frozen soil, "Help." Then beneath it, much deeper, as if etched by something heavier, "Not her." My breath froze in my throat. Not her. Something else was speaking, warning me. The temperature plummeted so suddenly my vision blurred. Frost crawled across the inside of my eyelids, my eyelashes stuck together. Then, footsteps. Dozens, all at once, circling me, fast, impossibly fast. I panicked and sprinted toward the truck. My boots slipped on the frost, my lungs burned. When I reached the driver's side, the handle wouldn't budge, frozen, sealed. The windows fogged from the inside. Something was in the truck. The fog spread slowly across the inside of the windshield, like breath from multiple mouths. I stumbled away and fell onto my hands, breath coming in ragged bursts. The heat returned, that unnatural, suffocating heat radiating from nowhere. A shadow stretched across the frost, growing long behind me. I didn't dare turn around. It leaned closer, breath on my neck, hot, damp. Then it spoke. My voice, perfect, calm, controlled. "It's okay, Daniel. Come back." Hot fingers grazed the back of my neck. I bolted. Not toward the truck, not toward the stumps. Toward the only refuge I could think of, the old service tunnel half a mile south. An abandoned emergency storm shelter built into the hillside 50 years ago. Locked, sealed, forgotten. Somewhere even the forest shouldn't breathe. Branches snapped as I ran. Voices called my name from both sides of the trail. Some pleading, some mocking, some whispering like lovers in the dark. My legs screamed with each step. The smell chased me, burnt hair and stone and something else beneath it, like soil wet with old blood. When I reached the shelter, I threw myself at the metal door. Locked. I slammed the handle, still locked. Footsteps closed in behind me, soft at first, then faster, then running. I grabbed the rusted emergency wheel on the door and twisted with everything I had left. My muscles burned, tendons screamed, something snapped in my wrist. The wheel turned. The door groaned. I pulled it open and threw myself inside, slamming it behind me. Dark, cold, silent. A silence so absolute it felt like stepping into a vacuum. Even my heartbeat sounded faint. The footsteps outside slowed, then stopped inches from the door. A soft knock. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. I backed farther into the tunnel, switching on the emergency light strip. A single dim line of orange glowed along the floor, revealing a narrow concrete corridor descending deeper underground. I walked backward, never looking away from the door. The knocking stopped, but something new happened. The door exhaled. Air pushed inward, carrying the smell with it. Heavy, dense, choking. The metal surface bulged inward as if fingers pressed against it from the other side. Then, whispering seeped through the ventilation grate near the floor. Not one voice, many, talking over each other in a frenzy of broken syllables. Then they unified, not in sound, in message. Not alone. The grate rattled violently. Dust sprayed outward. Something struck it from the other side, a sharp metallic impact that made the tunnel lights flicker. Then a second impact, then a third, then silence. I turned and ran deeper into the tunnel. The walls narrowed as I descended, air growing colder with each step. My flashlight flickered against rusted pipes, peeling paint, old equipment left behind decades ago. Then I reached the chamber at the bottom. A single room, circular, concrete, empty, except for the footprints. Bare, human, leading from the far wall toward the center. But there was no entrance on that side. The prints simply began, as if someone appeared in the concrete. I followed the trail with my light. The footprints stopped at a metal hatch in the floor, a hatch I'd never seen before, a hatch that wasn't on any blueprint. My light shook as I leaned closer. The metal was warm. Then, From beneath the hatch, someone whispered, "Daniel." The voice wasn't Lily's. It wasn't mine. It wasn't human. It was something trying to learn how to sound human, and it had almost figured it out. I staggered back, hitting the wall behind me. The hatch rattled, then bulged upward, once, twice, a third time. Whatever was beneath it wasn't knocking anymore. It was pushing. The metal warped. A crack formed. Warm air hissed out, thick with the smell of hair, stone, and the unmistakable scent of blood beneath snow. I pressed myself flat to the wall, breath shaking, watching the hatch bend, watching something force its way up. Then everything stopped. The hatch went still. No breath, no sound, no movement. Then one final whisper rose through the crack. "Found you." The light went out. I used to think the woods respected me. That was the arrogance of a younger ranger, a man who still believed that experience alone could hold back the unknown. But the night I answered a radio call from a voice that belonged to someone already dead was the night all of that changed. It was the moment when the forest stopped being a place I worked in and became something that watched me, listened to me, and remembered things I didn't know I'd forgotten. My name is Mark, and I'm 43 years old with 16 years spent patrolling Elk Valley National Forest. It's a remote sprawl of ridgelines, deep spruce stands, sandstone caves, old logging roads, and ravines that swallow sound. People love to romanticize the wilderness. They think it teaches them peace or solitude or whatever they're hungry to believe in. But the truth is that the forest teaches you what it wants to teach you. And sometimes those lessons don't come gently. Sometimes they come the way a storm comes, one snap at a time, before the entire sky breaks. Most locals know me. Most trust me. They see me in town when I stop at the diner in the mornings or pick up supplies from Mason's Market. They think I know the woods better than anyone. But they don't know half of what I've seen out there. Things I hesitate to talk about even now because saying them out loud felt for a long time like giving them permission to return. I think that's what fear really is. Recognition. A quiet knowing that something you experienced once can happen again, no matter how much you lie to yourself. Strangeness in Elk Valley wasn't unheard of. Campsites trashed without signs of animals, voices echoing across canyons on windless nights, tracks that started and stopped in the middle of hard-packed trail as if whatever made them had simply vanished. I rationalized most of it. You have to, or you lose your grip on the normalcy that keeps you sane. But there are moments that resist being explained. Moments you carry. Moments you don't talk about because you know people will either laugh or look at you like you're unraveling. The first time I realized something was wrong, truly wrong, was during a late autumn patrol 3 years ago. The air had that numb clarity that comes before snowfall. I was hiking up toward Ridgeback Overlook, where the trail skirts a cliff line before dipping into a bowl of old-growth fir. It's one of my favorite parts of the forest, mostly because of how quiet it gets up there, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. But that day, the silence felt different, weighted, intentional. A strange tapping drifted through the trees, faint at first like the sound of knuckles on wood. I stopped walking. The tapping stopped immediately. I remember holding my breath, waiting, listening. My radio was quiet. My heartbeat wasn't. I started forward again, trying to chalk it up to woodpeckers, but the tapping returned, louder, more deliberate, and coming from ahead of me on the trail. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm too steady to be an animal, too patient to be chance. I didn't call out. Something in me refused to. As I got closer to the cliff line, a smell hit me. The musty mineral scent of a cave, except there were no caves on that part of the ridge, at least none that were documented. Still, the air was unmistakable, carrying the damp breath of stone and cold darkness. I've spent enough time underground to recognize that kind of air. It tends to cling to memory. When I rounded the bend, the tapping stopped again. The trail ahead was empty, only the long sweep of the overlook, the valley stretching below and the wind beginning to slide across the canopy. I stood there, confused, staring at the ground, half expecting to see prints or claw marks. Instead, I saw a single stone resting in the middle of the path, smooth, round, like someone had placed it there on purpose. I reached down to move it. The stone was warm. That was the first time the forest tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. I convinced myself the warmth came from the sun, even though the entire ridge had been in shadow for hours. I told myself the tapping was branches shifting in a breeze I couldn't feel. Denial is easy when you want life to stay simple. A few weeks later, I learned the name of the hiker who disappeared near Ridgeback Overlook. Jacob, 32, a regular out here. His girlfriend told us he never stayed out after dark, but darkness swallowed him anyway. No signs of struggle. Tent intact. Gear still zipped and neatly arranged. Only his boots were missing. That detail haunted me more than anything else. Boots don't vanish unless someone walks out of them or walks into something else. We searched for 9 days. We found nothing. I carried the sound of that tapping with me everywhere after that, though I never admitted it, not even to the other rangers. You learn to keep certain things quiet in this job. People already assume we're superstitious. No need to give them evidence. But it wasn't until last winter that everything shifted from unsettling to terrifying. I was on night duty, something I'd grown comfortable with over the years. The dark used to feel like an old friend. Predictable. Consistent. A companion that didn't demand anything from you. But that night, the dark felt like it was waiting. Snow was falling hard, the kind that makes the forest feel padded and distant. Every sound gets muffled except your own breathing. I was in the truck heading toward Bear Creek Station, checking for stranded campers. Only one tent was supposed to be out there, belonging to another ranger named Lawrence. Lawrence was one of those guys who acted like nothing rattled him. Older than me by a few years, with a dry sense of humor and a mean cup of camp coffee. We'd worked together for nearly a decade. I trusted him, or at least I thought I did. At 1:17 a.m., my radio cracked alive. The voice that came through was thin, trembling, threaded with static. "Mark, do you copy?" I froze, my hand hovering over the mic. Because I recognized the voice immediately, it was Lawrence, except Lawrence had been found dead 3 days earlier. He'd fallen into a ravine during an early snowstorm. I'd been there when they recovered him. I'd helped carry his body up the ridge. I'd zipped the black bag myself. But his voice, the voice I knew well, was calling for me through the radio as if he were still out there, freezing, searching for help. "Mark, they're not gone. You need to get out." Every instinct in me rebelled against what I was hearing. My skin crawled, my breath hammered. My mind rejected the reality unfolding in front of me. But the voice didn't stop. It grew clearer, more urgent. "I'm still here. It's down in the trees. Don't look at it." My hand was shaking when I finally grabbed the mic. I don't even remember what I tried to say. Something useless, something human, something terrified. Before I could finish, the radio erupted with a single loud crack, like someone had slammed their fist into the receiver on the other end. And then it went dead. Silence, a silence thicker than the snow, a silence that felt alive. I sat there in the dark, engine idling, headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the falling flakes. My breath fogged the cab. My palms were sweating. And underneath it all, somewhere in the freezing trees beyond the windshield, I swear I felt something watching, something that wanted me to answer that call, something that wanted me to follow it. And even though every part of me knew that voice couldn't have been real, another part, the part of us that still remembers what it means to be prey, knew it absolutely was. The forest had started speaking back. I should have driven back to headquarters. Any rational ranger would have. But reason felt thin in that moment, stretched so tight it could tear. The snowfall outside my windshield drifted like falling ash, slow and hypnotic. Every instinct told me that if I moved, something outside would move with me. Predator logic, the ancient kind, the kind we pretend we outgrew. But fear doesn't evolve. It waits. I forced the truck into gear, the tires crunching over ice as I eased forward toward Bear Creek. I kept telling myself I wasn't looking for anything supernatural. I was checking on the campsite the way protocol demanded. But that was a lie. What pulled me forward wasn't duty. It was something darker. A need to see for myself that the world still made sense. A need to disprove what I'd heard. A need to protect the fragile frame I'd built around my understanding of the woods. The snowstorm thickened. Headlights bounced in ghostly waves across the pines, turning the forest into a corridor of twisting white shapes. I shut off the radio, but that didn't stop the memory of Lawrence's voice from pulsing in my mind. The way he'd whispered, "Don't look at it." The way he'd sounded like a man half buried in frost, barely clinging to breath. Part of me wondered, if a voice could come from someone long dead, then maybe death wasn't the barrier we assumed it was. Maybe it was a doorway. Maybe it opened both ways. The campsite came into view at the edge of the creek, a single tent, snow-laden, motionless. The fabric sagging under the weight of the storm. The place looked deserted. No lantern, no footprints, no sign of struggle. The world felt paused, as if time itself had frozen out of respect for whatever had happened here. I stepped out of the truck, immediate regret. The cold hit me like a wall, but that wasn't what rattled me. It was the quiet, a thick, absolute quiet. Even snow should make sound, soft impacts, tiny compressions. But the world here made none, as if the forest were suffocating its own voice. I moved slowly toward the tent, each breath turning me into a machine. Inhale, exhale, step, repeat. My flashlight carved a narrow beam across the snow, and right as I reached the tent's entrance, a sound drifted through the trees. Not the wind, not an animal. A low, rhythmic hum. It rose and fell like someone breathing heavily through their nose. Steady. Cold, measured. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled upward, and for a moment I was sure that if I turned around I'd see someone standing behind me. But I didn't look. I couldn't. I unzipped the tent with a slow, shaking hand. Inside, the sleeping bag was still zipped shut. A pair of gloves rested beside it, a thermos half full. It was the picture of order, the picture of someone who hadn't expected anything to go wrong. But the smell hit me the moment I ducked my head inside. Rot. Not the rot of an animal or food. Human rot. I stumbled back, gagging into the snow, and just as I did, my radio crackled back to life. No voice this time, just static, a deep, pulsing hiss that sounded almost like someone trying to breathe through a damaged throat. I backed away from the tent, the hum in the trees growing louder, closer, more deliberate. The forest around me seemed to tighten. The storm felt thinner, the snow falling more slowly, as if gravity itself hesitated to move anything too quickly. I turned toward the truck, but I didn't take more than a few steps before I saw them. Tracks. Fresh ones, but not human, not animal. Long, deep impressions in the snow, too far apart for any normal creature, yet too defined to be random. Each print had a central gouge as if claws had dug deep into the ice, and something about their spacing made my stomach twist. The stride wasn't right. It was almost experimental, as if whatever had walked here wasn't used to the idea of walking at all. My breath caught when I realized something else. The tracks circled my truck. A perfect ring. Like something had been examining it, waiting for me to step out. The hum cut off. Silence fell. A silence so absolute I could hear my pulse in my throat. And then a sudden, sharp exhale. Not mine. Something was standing in the tree line. I didn't see it. I didn't need to. Every cell in my body registered its presence, the same way you feel heat before stepping near a fire. A low, guttural rumble reverberated across the air. Not aggressive, not territorial. Curious. Something large moved between the trees, its shape breaking the pattern of falling snow. I watched the shadow shift, tall, hulking, unnaturally still, except for the slight tilt of what I assumed was its head. It was studying me with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. I forced myself not to look directly at it. I remembered Lawrence's voice. "Don't look at it." So I stared at the ground, at the snow, at my own shaking hands. And that's when the radio spoke again. "Mark, don't run." Lawrence's voice. Except this time it wasn't coming through static. It was coming from the trees. My skin went cold in a way the air couldn't explain. I backed up, step by step, toward the truck without turning my body. The crunch of snow beneath my boots betrayed me. The shadow shifted. Something massive leaned forward, brushing aside a curtain of branches. The shape grew clearer. Broad shoulders, elongated limbs, a torso covered in dark, tangled fur. I didn't dare look higher. If I saw its face, I knew something inside me would break. Its breathing deepened, slow, wet, thick, like it was smelling the air around me, memorizing me, trying to understand what I was. Mark, the voice again. Closer, more distorted, more wrong. I reached the truck. My hand fumbled for the door handle, slipping once, twice. When I finally yanked it open, something heavy crashed against the trees behind me. A burst of snow fell from the branches above. I dove inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The forest exploded with motion. Not footsteps, not running, but a vibrating tremor as if something enormous had stepped closer to the earth, pushing its weight into the frozen ground. The windshield fogged with my breath. My pulse thrashed. The radio hissed with short bursts of static. And then the truck tilted. A slow, deliberate lift on the passenger side. An experimental testing of weight. The tires groaned. Metal creaked. I pressed back against the seat, helpless to do anything but feel the truck sway under the power of something that shouldn't exist. When the truck finally settled again, the impact was soft, almost gentle. Like whatever had lifted it had made a choice to put it down instead of flipping it. I didn't move for nearly a full minute. Not until the breathing outside stopped. Not until the silence returned. Not until the snow resumed falling like nothing had happened. I stayed there until dawn. When daylight finally filtered through the trees, something inside me unclenched just enough to allow movement. I stepped out into the snow. The forest looked normal again. Ordinary. Deceptively peaceful. But the tracks circling the truck were still there. Only now they were joined by something else. A single stone. Smooth. Round. Resting in the snow beside my driver's side door. Warm when I picked it up. Just like the one I'd found near Ridgeback. Just like the one I had ignored. The forest was sending me a message, and I was done pretending I didn't hear it. That stone stayed warm in my hand far longer than it should have. Not hot, just warm enough to feel alive. Warm enough to make me feel like I was holding someone's pulse. I didn't know what it meant, not then, but I knew I wasn't supposed to leave it behind. I slipped it into my coat pocket and tried not to think about how wrong the whole morning felt. Dawn normally brought clarity out here, but that day it only made the world look exposed, vulnerable, as if the light itself was intruding on a place that preferred darkness. Back at headquarters, I didn't file a report. What would I even write? Something lifted my truck during a snowstorm. A dead coworker spoke to me through the radio. The forest is communicating using stones. The truth loses its shape when you put it on paper. It becomes flat, brittle, easier to dismiss. And a part of me wasn't ready to see my own fear spelled out so plainly. But I did mention the missing ranger, unofficially, to the only person I trusted enough to talk to about strange things. Rebecca. She'd been a ranger longer than I had. Mid-50s, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who knew more about the forest's scars than anyone else. She'd found bodies out here. She'd tracked injured cougars for miles, stitched wounds with her own hands, and spent 7 nights lost in a canyon system during a storm that nearly killed her. She didn't scare easily. But when I told her about the voice on the radio, the strange tracks, the warm stone, she didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She just asked in a quiet voice, was it mimicking him? That word, mimicking, lodged in me like a thorn. I didn't answer right away because something about the memory of Lawrence's voice kept twisting every time I revisited it. The tone had been right, the cadence, the desperation, but the breath behind the words, the breath had been wrong. Too wet, too heavy, like something was pushing air through a throat that didn't belong to it. I told her yes, and she sighed in a way that felt like an admission, one she'd been holding on to for years. She didn't tell me everything that day, not even half, but she told me enough to shift something inside me. She'd heard voices too, usually only in the deepest parts of the forest, sometimes calling her name, sometimes whispering to get her attention. And once, years before I joined the team, she heard her own father's voice near a ravine where a teenage girl had vanished weeks earlier. Her father had been dead for 16 years. People talked about Bigfoot and old tribal spirits and ghosts out in Elk Valley. Locals had legends older than the country itself. Hunters swore they saw creatures walking upright between the trees at night. Hikers heard footsteps behind them on empty trails. But Rebecca wasn't a believer in folklore. She believed in observation. Something out there mimics what it thinks will lure you closer. Something that studies you the way a hunter studies deer trails. Something patient, something ancient. I didn't sleep that night. I paced my living room until sunrise, replaying every sound from the storm, every breath, every hum, every shifting shadow. I traced the strange tracks in my mind over and over. But what kept repeating most clearly was the message. Don't look at it. I knew it wasn't Lawrence who said that, not the real him. It was something using his voice like a mask. Something that didn't want to be seen. Maybe because looking at it changed something. Maybe because recognition mattered. Predators act differently when prey looks them in the eyes. But the forest wasn't done teaching me. 2 weeks later, I responded to a missing persons report near Calver's Notch, a narrow canyon carved into the southern range, dense with fir and spruce, known for echoing sound in strange ways. Hikers joked it was the forest's throat. Locals said voices traveled there long after the people had stopped speaking. A couple had gone missing, mid-30s, experienced backpackers. They'd set out for a weekend trip and never returned. Their car was still in the lot. Tracks led into the woods. None came back out. I went alone. Protocol said otherwise, but too many rangers were sick, snowed in, or dealing with other emergencies, and some small, quiet instinct in me felt like I needed to see what was happening with my own eyes. Maybe it was foolishness. Maybe it was inevitability. The forest around Calver's Notch feels different from the rest of Elk Valley. The trees grow closer together, their branches knit overhead, turning the air dim even at midday. Ground fog settles in long, sweeping bands, drifting like slow-motion smoke. And the sound there does something strange. It bends. It returns in shapes you don't expect. Even your own footsteps echo like they belong to someone else. I followed the couple's trail markers deeper into the notch. They were experienced, calm hikers. They'd hung ribbons on branches, left reflective tape on rocks. But about 3 miles in, the markers stopped abruptly. Not torn down, not scattered, just stopped. As if they'd simply decided not to mark their way anymore. I called out for them. My voice hit the canyon walls, warped, stretched, returned to me in a tone I didn't recognize. It sounded like someone else saying my words back at me, but with the wrong rhythm, the wrong urgency. The deeper I went, the thicker the fog became. It clung low to the forest floor, swirling around my boots. The air smelled wrong, not like rot or decay, but like something old and wet and mineral heavy, the scent of deep caves where sunlight hasn't touched stone in centuries. Then I heard it, a soft tapping, faint, precise, coming from ahead of me. The same rhythm I'd heard months before near Ridgeback. The tapping grew louder as I moved forward until I realized it wasn't coming from trees. It was coming from under the ground. Each tap vibrated through the soil, subtle but undeniable, like knuckles brushing the underside of a wooden table. Then the tapping stopped, and a voice rose through the silence. Not loud, not yelling, just close. Too close. Mark, down here. Every muscle in my body seized. The voice was male, ragged, terrified. It was the missing husband. I recognized his voice from the recording his sister had provided us during the initial report. I'd listened to him joke about the trip, talk about his love for the forest, reassure his parents that he'd be back in a few days. But now that same voice drifted up from the earth. Help me, please. I knelt slowly, pressing my gloved hand against the snowy soil. It vibrated once, faintly, as if someone below had tapped upward. This was impossible. I knew it. I knew it the way you know fire burns. But fear makes rationality soft. The earth shifted again, this time more forcefully, a tremor that pushed small cracks across the frozen that I backed away instinctively. And then something broke the surface. not a hand, not a body, a stone, smooth, round. It rose from the soil as if pushed upward by something unseen. It rolled toward me, stopping at my boots. And even through the cold, even nestled in snow, I could see steam rising faintly from its surface. It was warm, just like the others. The ground sighed beneath me, an exhale of shifting earth, of breath forced through narrow spaces. The voice rose again, warped now, stretched in unnatural ways, as if whatever spoke didn't understand how to shape the sounds correctly. Help. Me. Mark. Something was using his voice. Something beneath the ground. And I realized then that the tapping wasn't a call for rescue. It was bait. The forest didn't want to warn me. It wanted me to come closer. The realization hit me with the force of a falling tree. Whatever was beneath the soil didn't want help. It wanted presence. It wanted attention, acknowledgement, recognition. That warm stone at my feet felt like a lure, not a message, an invitation instead of a warning. I backed up slowly, careful not to break eye contact with the ground. Irrational, I know, but instinct insisted on it. The earth seemed almost to pulse, as though something massive shifted beneath it, listening to the cadence of my breath. The voice calling my name dissolved into a watery rasp before fading entirely, as if something had tested the limits of imitation and reached the edge of its ability. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Thick, expectant. It settled over the forest like a hand pressed against a mouth. My lungs tightened. I could hear my heartbeat too clearly. I forced myself to step away, one slow retreating motion, then another. The forest around Calver's Notch felt more alive with every backward step I took. Trees leaned in the faint wind like eavesdroppers. Fog curled around my legs like cautious fingers, and that scent, the cave smell, followed me. When I finally turned and began walking back toward the trailhead, the forest exhaled. Not figuratively. I heard it, a long, low, cavernous breath rolling up through the ground, as if some massive tunnel system beneath me had suddenly opened to inhale. The soil didn't shift this time, but the rhythm of that breath followed me through the narrowing trees. I didn't run. Running in the woods when you're being watched is like dropping into cold water. You make yourself visible, frantic, predictable, prey. So I walked with the deliberate pace of someone who knew he was already being tracked, because pretending otherwise wasn't an option anymore. It was nearly dusk when I reached the trailhead. The couple's car sat in the lot, dusted with snow, untouched. I stood staring at it for a long moment, the fading light casting long shadows across the windshield. 2 coffee mugs sat in the cup holders. A pair of gloves lay on the back seat. They had never come back to this car. They never would. And in the snow beside the passenger door, another stone. Warm. I didn't touch this one. I didn't need to. The message was becoming clearer. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't misinterpretation. I was being marked, identified, observed. I left the parking lot without filing any official notes. Protocol was crumbling beneath the weight of what I knew now, and paperwork rarely captures the truth anyway. Over the next few days, small things began happening, subtle at first. I'd hear a voice whisper my name when I walked into the tree line to start a patrol. A twig would snap behind me when I knew I was alone. The forest's usual sounds, woodpeckers, owls, distant river flow, seemed muffled, replaced by something else, something slower, something breathing. And every time I tried to sleep, I'd dream of caves, deep, winding tunnels, carved stone chambers that weren't made by human hands. I'd wake up gasping, the taste of damp minerals coating my throat. Rebecca noticed something was wrong before I told her. She cornered me near the supply shed on a cold morning. "You look like hell," she said. I'd told her what I'd seen at Calver's Notch. All of it. Her face didn't soften. It hardened. Not in disbelief, but in recognition. She told me about a ranger we'd never met, someone who'd worked in Elk Valley decades before either of us arrived. His name was Alan. The legend was he left the job after a winter patrol where he claimed to hear voices rising from the ground. His official report said unstable terrain caused auditory distortions. But the unofficial story said something else. Alan claimed there were caves under Elk Valley, deep ones, ancient ones, carved out long before humans arrived. He said something lived down there, something that could crawl into the walls of the earth, something that could mimic the sounds of those it had consumed. Consumed. That word stuck to my ribs like tar. I asked her why no one had ever told me this. She said because most people didn't believe it, and the ones who did had learned the hard way that believing didn't help. Her voice cracked when she said that, a tiny fracture in her usually solid tone. But she shook it off and handed me a map, an old, yellowed topographic sheet that had been photocopied so many times the ink was fading. She pointed to a section far from the marked trails, deep in the northern expanse. There, she said, old sinkholes, caverns, places the original survey team documented, but the Park Service never opened to the public. She told me she thought whatever was stalking me was tied to those caves. If something wanted me, wanted my attention or presence, it would lead me there eventually. I asked how she knew that. She didn't answer. Just told me to stop going into the valley alone. But that warning came too late. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of tapping at my window. Slow, patient, deliberate. The same rhythm from the ridge, the same rhythm from beneath the ground. My house sits at the forest edge, just a few yards from the tree line. The window beside my bed faces that direction. At first, in the darkness, I thought it was just a branch. But branches don't tap with rhythm. Branches don't pause when you hold your breath. Branches don't lean closer. I forced myself to roll over and look. The window was fogged from cold, but something was on the other side of the glass. A shadow, tall, too tall, a silhouette shaped wrong, wide shoulders tapering into a narrow head, a neck that seemed unnaturally long. It didn't move, not even when I sat up, but its breath, warm, steady, fogged the lower half of the window in soft bursts. Then it spoke, not loudly, barely more than a murmur through the glass. Come out. The voice was mine, not similar, not close. Mine, perfectly reproduced. Tone, cadence, breath, everything. Come out. The shape pressed closer. The glass trembled. My skin went cold in a way no winter wind could explain. I didn't move. Couldn't. My chest locked. My hands shook. I stared at my own reflection in the fogged window, superimposed over the shadow outside. The thing tapped the glass again. Tap, tap, tap. Then slowly it lifted something into view. Another stone. Warm enough that thin trails of steam curled from its surface, blurring the silhouette behind it. I realized then, this thing didn't just want my attention. It wanted recognition. A bond. A tether. It wanted me to take the stone, to accept it. And I don't know if it was courage or terror that made me whisper no. But the instant the word left my mouth, the shadow recoiled. Not like an animal frightened, more like a person insulted. A displeased, almost injured flinch. Then it vanished. Not walked away. Not slipped into the woods. Vanished. Gone between one heartbeat and the next. The stone outside dropped to the ground with a soft thud. My breath returned in a violent rush. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning I found fresh tracks in the snow. Not the long, experimental ones from the storm. These were different. Deep. Precise. Human-shaped. But larger than any human foot should ever be. And around each print were smaller indentations, like fingers pressed into the snow for balance. Whatever had stood at my window had knelt, watching me, studying me, waiting for a different answer. And as the sun rose, warming the frost-bitten world, I felt something I hadn't felt since my first year on the job, something far more dangerous than fear. The sense that the forest had chosen me, not as a guardian, not as a ranger, but as prey. And the worst part, the truly terrifying part, was the growing clarity that I wasn't just being hunted, I was being invited. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there with the plastic bag of batteries in my hand, the cold seeping through the gloves I wasn't wearing. He had appeared without any sound, no crunch of gravel, no rustle of brush, no door swinging open from the maintenance shed. 1 second the yard was empty, and the next he was there, like he'd stepped out of the shadow cast by the fire tower's long metal lattice. He wasn't smiling. He never did. He looked down at the bag, then at me. Hill sector. Batteries. Everything all right? I had the strange feeling he already knew the answer, but was giving me the rope to hang myself anyway. Something's wrong with the radios," I said. "I'm getting calls that don't make sense." "What kind of calls?" There was no point dodging it. "From officers who aren't alive anymore." His jaw didn't clench, but the air around him felt like it tightened. "You sure?" "No. Yes. I know what I heard, but I don't know how any of it could have happened." The old ranger stared at me a long time, long enough for the light wind to push leaves across the yard in small spirals. "Come inside," he finally said, turning before I could agree or protest. I followed him into the supply shed. The overhead bulb flickered to life, humming like it always did. He closed the door behind us, pushing the deadbolt in, not that it ever really kept out cold air, let alone anything else. He walked to the corner, pulled a stool over, and sat down. He didn't ask me to sit. He just looked at me like a doctor who already had the diagnosis and was deciding how much truth the patient could handle. "You know," he said, "every ranger who lasts in these woods does so because they learn one lesson. The forest doesn't lie, but it also doesn't tell the truth in a way you expect." I crossed my arms, less out of defiance and more to ground myself. "What are you trying to say?" "You heard something meant for you. Meant for right now." I heard a dead man's voice. He shook his head slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe something used his voice." That sentence hit me deeper than I wanted to admit. I'd spent years laughing off folklore around here. Wendigos, mimics, shadow men, tunnel echoes, kids' ghost stories used to scare tourists or explain away tragedies. But this wasn't a campfire fable. This was a radio system running on a closed channel. A voice using an old call sign. A voice everyone knew had been buried on top of the ridge with a pine marker because his family couldn't afford a stone. "So what do I do?" I asked, the words sounding small even to me. The old ranger leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You keep working, you stay aware, and you don't answer the next time it calls." A dry laugh came out of me before I could stop it. "That's your advice? Pretend I don't hear it?" "That's not pretending, that's surviving." He stood. "Finish your battery run, but stay out of the caves." My breath hitched. He had no reason to mention caves. I hadn't said anything about the cave on Lion Ridge, the one I'd found earlier, the one with the strange indentation in the back wall that had matched the shape of my hand. He opened the door for me, and cold air flooded in. That unspoken understanding, that unacknowledged knowledge he wasn't willing to explain. It unnerved me more than the radio call itself. Still, I nodded, left the shed, and walked to my truck with the battery bag twisting in the wind. I didn't go back to Hill Sector right away. I drove, not to patrol anything or help anyone, but because sitting still felt like inviting something to catch up. The roads out here were narrow ribbons carved into the spine of Washington's Cascades. Pines leaned over the asphalt like eavesdroppers. My headlights slid across trunks and brush, creating brief illusions of silhouettes that vanished before I could look twice. I didn't want to go back to the cave. I didn't want to know what the voice meant by "not alone." But fear has a strange gravity to it. You get too close, and eventually it pulls you in whether you want it to or not. By the time I reached the turnoff to Lion Ridge, the sun had already dropped low, staining the last line of clouds a bruised purple. I idled at the intersection, fingers gripping the wheel hard enough to ache. I told myself I should keep driving, straight, forward, home, anywhere but there. But the cave felt like the center of this new, twisted puzzle. And I had the sickening instinct that avoiding it would only make whatever was happening worse. So I turned. The gravel road crunched beneath the tires, the sound louder than usual. Every thump of stone against the undercarriage made me flinch. The forest here was thicker, older, carrying that heavy silence that feels like it's been waiting centuries for someone to break it. I parked in the same spot as earlier. Killed the engine. Let the quiet ooze back in. The moment I stepped out, the temperature felt wrong. Not just colder, wrong. Like I'd stepped into the shadow of something massive, even though there was no sun left to cast one. As I walked, I saw the shape I had missed earlier. Tracks. Not footprints, not exactly. They were deep, spaced too far apart for any normal gate. The edges were crisp, made recently. Something had moved through here after I left, moving toward the cave. The indentation looked almost hoof-like, but not the hoof of any animal I knew. The weight behind it had been enormous. I crouched down, laid my hand near the print, not touching it. It was almost as wide as my hand was long. My mouth went dry. Something primal in me, the instinct older than language, whispered to turn around. I kept walking. The cave entrance yawned just ahead, a dark, toothless mouth in the rock face. My boots hesitated at the threshold the way a dog hesitates near an invisible fence. The darkness inside wasn't normal cave darkness. It felt layered, like something was hiding behind it. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam stretched across the rough stone walls, catching flecks of quartz. The air was heavier than before, thick enough to taste, metallic, like blood in snow. That's when I heard it, a faint scuff, not behind me. Inside, something was moving slowly, dragging across stone. I should have left. I should have backed out step by step, called it in, let someone else with more experience and less fear deal with it. But the thought of turning my back to that darkness terrified me even more than entering it. I took a step, then another. The flashlight beam jittered as my hand shook. The deeper I went, the more the cave seemed to constrict. The walls weren't actually closing in, but my breath was. My lungs felt tight. My heart thudded in my throat. The sound came again, a scrape, a shift, a slow inhalation like air moving through a cavern far larger than this one. "Hello?" I said, immediately regretting it. My voice echoed back 6 times, bouncing strangely. The last echo sounded off-pitch, like one repetition wasn't my voice at all. I froze. The beam landed on the back wall. The indentation was still there, a perfect outline of a hand. Only now the center of the handprint wasn't empty. Something rested inside it. A radio. Not one of ours, not any model I recognized. Older. Bulkier. Its metal casing dented and darkened with age. The antenna bent at an unnatural angle. My flashlight trembled over it. The device shouldn't have worked. It shouldn't have been left out here. It shouldn't have been emitting anything. But the frequency screen glowed faintly, and from the tiny speaker came a voice so thin it sounded like it was being dragged across a razor. "Ranger, where are you?" Not the voice from earlier. Something worse. Something older. Something that had learned how to shape words but hadn't mastered the humanity behind them. I didn't touch it. I couldn't, but the voice didn't need me to. "Do not leave," it whispered. "You are almost here." My stomach twisted. My legs moved before my brain did, but as I turned to run, the radio on my own belt crackled sharply. Then a familiar voice came through. The dead officer again. Stronger this time, closer, as if he were speaking right into my ear. "Don't move." I froze so completely that even my breathing stalled. The cave air felt like it thickened around me, waiting. My own radio hissed again, the static rising in a pressured, choking way that made my eardrums vibrate. "Don't move," the dead officer repeated, more insistent this time. His voice sounded wrong, not just impossible, but altered. It had the same tone he used to have, but strained through something else, like someone was wearing his vocal cords like clothing. My flashlight beam quivered against the cave walls. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't look behind me. The air pressing against my back felt occupied, like something tall was leaning close enough that if I moved even an inch, it would brush against me. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, though I meant it only for myself. The radio answered anyway. "You need to listen." My pulse hammered against my ribs. "You're dead," I said, barely audible. "You died in these woods." Static swallowed the cave for a moment. Then the voice replied, lower this time. "I didn't leave." I didn't know what that meant, whether he was trapped, echoing, or simply being imitated by something that understood fear better than I did. But the certainty in the voice made my chest tighten. It felt like a truth I'd brushed against before but never fully acknowledged. The voice continued, "There's something behind you." I didn't turn. I couldn't. My instincts screamed that if I pivoted, if I even tilted my head, whatever stood in the dark would reveal itself in a way I couldn't survive. "You need to get out," the voice said. Each word landed like a stone dropped into a well. "Now." "I can't," I said. "Something's blocking the entrance," the voice crackled. "It's standing between you and the way out." My skin crawled. I stared into the cave's black throat, the place where the strange radio still pulsed with faint, dying light. For a moment I thought I saw something move in the dark, a slow shift of shadow that didn't belong to me or to any living person. I swallowed hard. "Why is it here?" The dead voice hesitated, the way a human would hesitate when choosing whether to tell the truth. "It lives here." My throat tightened. "What does?" "You wouldn't understand." That wasn't an answer. My panic was rising fast now, a hot pressure behind my sternum. "I need to get out," I whispered. "Tell me how." The voice changed, sharper, urgent. "Don't make a sound." I froze again, breath locked in my chest, because behind me something exhaled, a long, slow, rattling breath that felt moist against the back of my neck. The flashlight flickered. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to sprint forward, deeper into the cave, run from the breath on my skin, run from the thing I could not see. But deeper meant going closer to the radio, closer to the handprint, closer to the place where that unnatural whisper had crawled out. "You need to get low," the dead voice said. "Crouch." I didn't move. The breath behind me came again, closer this time, like whatever was standing there was leaning down. The air stank of rot and cold stone, like something that had been buried and pulled itself up recently. "Crouch," the voice insisted. Slowly trembling, I bent my knees. My legs resisted at first, tense and locked, but I forced them downward inch by inch. As I lowered myself, I felt the air shift over my head. Something massive adjusting its posture behind me, no longer directly looming over my spine. That tiny shift saved me. "Now," the voice said, "crawl forward. Stay small." The humiliation of obeying a dead man's voice didn't matter. The fear drowned everything else. I dropped to my hands and knees, my gloves scraping stone. As I crawled, my flashlight beam shook so violently, the cave walls stuttered in and out of existence. Behind me, the creature, whatever it was, shifted again. Its footfall was heavy, slow, deliberate. The sound of enormous weight pressing into gravel. The same pattern as the prints I'd seen outside. It was following me. I moved faster, my breath short and ragged. The cave floor began sloping upward, barely, but enough for me to feel it in my palms. "The entrance is close," the dead voice whispered. "Keep going." I could feel cold air hitting my face now. Faint, thin, like the mouth of the cave was only feet away. The creature behind me let out another exhale, harsher this time, like it was frustrated or confused as to why its prey was suddenly so low to the ground. My hand brushed against something soft, cloth. My heart lurched. I thought it was a person lying there. But when my light caught it, I realized it was an old ranger jacket. Torn, weather-worn, half buried under dust. A patch on the sleeve, a name partially faded. I recognized the letters. It belonged to the dead officer. My stomach twisted. I pulled my hand back quickly and kept crawling. "You're almost clear," the voice said. "Don't look behind you. Don't ever look." That was enough to push me faster. My knees burned as they scraped the rock. The cave mouth was now within reach, a faint ribbon of night sky visible ahead. And then suddenly, the cold air surged around me. I burst out of the cave like a trapped animal, scrambling across the gravel. I didn't stop until I hit the tree line, only then did I turn around. The cave entrance was empty. Silent. Black as a sealed grave. My flashlight cut across it, beam trembling, but nothing stood there. Nothing moved. The air was still again, as if the forest had reset itself, swallowing the moment whole. My radio crackled. I jumped, heart slamming against my ribs. The dead voice came again, weaker now. "Don't go back." I swallowed hard. "What is that thing?" Static crackled for several seconds before the voice returned, almost a whisper. "I don't know what it is." "Then how do you know it'll follow me?" Silence. And then, "Because that's how it found me." Cold washed down my spine. The implication was so clear, so horrifying, that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The dead voice faded slowly, dissolving into static. Then the static dissolved into quiet. I stood there for several minutes, staring into the dark cave, listening for any sign that something was moving, breathing, crawling its way toward me. But the forest was still again, empty in that unnatural way that told me everything had been watching and waiting. I forced myself to walk back to my truck. Every step felt like an invitation for something to drag me backward. When I finally reached the door and slammed it shut, the sound echoed far too loudly across the trees. I tried to start the engine. It didn't turn over, not even a click. My hands shook as I turned the key again. Nothing. Then from the radio, something new. Not the dead officer, not the mimic voice from the old radio. Something deeper, more resonant, less human. A voice that did not speak words so much as shape feelings into sound. A low, rumbling murmur that vibrated through the frame of the truck. It said only one thing: you should not have left. The voice inside my truck didn't roar or shout. It didn't need to. Its quietness was the part that hollowed me out. It filled the air like cold smoke, sinking into the cracks of the dashboard, my sleeves, my bones. You should not have left. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look at the radio. My hands stayed locked on the steering wheel, white-knuckled, as if gripping hard enough might anchor me to something stable and human. The forest outside was motionless. No wind, no insects, no distant branches scraping against trunks. Everything had stilled with that voice, like the entire world was leaning in to listen. I didn't want to be here, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I didn't choose this. My breath fogged the windshield, but the fog didn't fade. It lingered, too thick, too slow, like something was breathing in the cab with me. Then the radio hummed, vibrating low, almost sympathetic. You were called. By who? The hum deepened, dark enough to make a low ache in my ears. By the ones who never leave. My skin prickled. The dead officer, the jacket in the cave, the voice mimicking him, the prints outside. My own instincts screaming at me since the moment I entered the cave, everything pressed together like puzzle pieces, forming a picture I didn't want to see. I'm not part of this, I said, my voice arching into panic. I'm alive. I'm not staying. You already heard the call. The radio flickered with faint static. That is enough. No? I said louder. I can leave. I can drive out. I can... The hum stopped. Silence. Then, behind the cab, outside in the darkness, something thudded softly against the truck bed. My breath froze. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare. Another thud. Closer. Then something dragged across the metal, slow, heavy, deliberate. A sound like claws on scraping the truck's cold steel. The radio crackled harshly, snapping me out of paralysis. They can't enter the cab. The dead officer's voice returned, distorted and fraying at the edges like old tape. Glass and metal confused them. A breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding escaped me. What do I do? Wait until it loses interest. That thing followed me, I whispered. It followed you. It broke into the cave. It breathes like something that remembers being alive. That's because it was, the voice answered softly. My heart clenched. You need to tell me what it is. A long silence. Then, something older than these woods, older than us. It wears what it finds. Voices, footsteps, fear. I shut my eyes tightly. Why me? You heard me call, the voice said. You shouldn't have answered. But I didn't know you were dead. The radio buzzed. But the forest did. Outside, the scraping quieted. Then it stopped. The radio hissed softly. Don't look. I sat there, every muscle paralyzed. The windshield remained fogged, but in the upper corner a slow smear formed, as though something dragged a finger, or something like a finger, across the glass. Then another. Then a third. Each movement was patient, curious, deliberate. I felt tears gather, hot against the cold that wrapped the cab. I didn't wipe them. Didn't move at all. Minutes passed, or hours, or maybe time simply bent under the weight of the thing outside. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sounds receded, the dragging, the scraping, the pressure on the metal. Finally, the forest released a breath. Branches shifted. Leaves rustled. Life crawled back into the world inch by inch. My radio crackled again. It's gone, the dead officer said. Fainter now, for now. For now. The implications hollowed me out. I turned the ignition again. This time the engine roared to life so violently the whole truck trembled. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, spun the tires in gravel, and tore down the road, branches whipping past the windows, headlights cutting through the trees in erratic white arcs. I drove like prey, like I was racing the dark back to someplace where the world made sense. The entire time, the radio stayed silent. When I finally reached the ranger station, my hands were numb from gripping the wheel. I parked crooked, half across two spaces, left the engine idling, and stumbled out into the cold air, almost collapsing when my feet touched solid ground. The old ranger was standing outside the door like he'd been waiting. He took one look at me, my shaking arms, my dirt-smeared jacket, the hollow terror in my eyes, and didn't ask what happened. He simply nodded once, somberly, like I had crossed the threshold into a truth he had hoped I never touched. "You heard it," he said. "It wasn't a question." I swallowed. "It said I shouldn't have left." The old ranger's jaw tightened. "It says that to everyone." I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" He looked away toward the tree line. "Because telling you doesn't stop it from happening. The forest chooses who it calls." I hated that answer. I hated it almost more than the voice in the cave. I stepped closer, desperate. How do I make it stop? How do I not hear him again? The old ranger shook his head slowly, eyes dim with something like mourning. "You won't hear him again." Relief washed through me for half a second, until he added, "But you will hear something else." My breath caught. "What?" "The forest doesn't repeat its mistakes," he said softly. "It evolves." I felt dizzy. What does it want? He faced me fully now, the station lights casting deep lines across his weathered face. "It wants witnesses." For a moment I didn't understand. Then it clicked. The dead officer, the jacket, the cave, the voices, the mimicry. The creature that had followed me from the ridge to the truck. It didn't just want to kill. It wanted to be remembered, to be known, to spread. I stared at the old ranger, voice shaking. "What do I do now?" He took a long breath. "You come to work," he said. "You hike, you watch, and you pray it never calls you again. And if it does," he hesitated, "then you answer differently." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my cabin with my back against the wall, watching the window. Every sound became a threat. Every creak in the rafters carried the memory of breath on my neck. Just before dawn, I turned my radio back on. It was silent at first. Then faintly, like something testing the boundaries of imitation, a whisper brushed through the speaker. "Ranger, I found something." Not the dead officer's voice. Not the cave voice. Something new. Something learning. Something evolving. My entire body went cold. And for the first time in my career, I understood what true fear was, not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that waits with you in the dark, patient and assured, knowing the forest is wide and time is long, and your name is already carved somewhere inside its memory. I turned the radio off, and it whispered again anyway. I'll start the only way I know how, by telling you the truth no one else will say out loud. It wasn't the missing hiker that broke me. It was the silence. People underestimate silence. They think of it as peaceful or holy or soothing. They imagine campfires and stars and the soft hush of wind through lodgepole pines. But silence, real silence, the kind that swallows the world until even your heartbeat sounds wrong, that kind is predatory. It watches. It waits. It decides. The forest went silent right before his shift ended, and I've never heard anything so loud in my goddamn life. My name doesn't matter. If you're hearing this, I'm probably already listed as off-duty, AWOL, or dead. Depends who gets to the paperwork first. I've been a ranger for almost 18 years, mostly backcountry patrol, often alone. I used to take pride in that. I told myself it meant I was strong, self-reliant, useful. But truth is, I think I chose solitude because it felt like punishment I deserved. I lost a trainee 5 years ago. Her name was Mina, 24, too smart for her own good. She was supposed to shadow me for 3 weeks, learn the ropes, get comfortable with isolation. But on our 4th day out, she vanished. No signs of struggle, no tracks, no scent for dogs to follow. One moment she was behind me on the trail, and the next, Nothing. I replay those 5 minutes more than I replay whole years of my life. I told everyone I thought she stopped to tie her boot, that maybe she stepped off the trail. But that's a lie. The truth is darker, and I've never said it out loud. The woods went silent before she disappeared, just like they did last week. I'm not sharing this to clear my conscience. There's no clearing it. I'm sharing this because something is happening in these forests, something old, something patient. And if I don't say it now, it'll die with me. Last week, my shift was supposed to end at 1900. A quick sweep of the old mining road, check the outposts, log the notes, go home. Easy. Routine. The kind of shift I used to pray for. The mining road isn't used by the public. Hell, half the staff don't even know it still exists. It runs about 6 miles into the interior and dead ends at a sealed tunnel, the Hartwell Shaft, abandoned in the 40s after cave-ins. Locals whisper about it, but they whisper about everything out here. Unearthed bones, ghost lights, old tribal warnings. You do this job long enough, and every story starts sounding like a cautionary metaphor for staying sober on night shift. I parked the truck and started the walk. Dry air, pine resin, distant stream noise, the usual soundtrack. My boots crunched gravel, my radio hummed with static, birds argued in the canopy. Nothing special. Then the radio picked up breathing. At first I assumed it was cross-channel bleed, maybe someone's mic keyed by accident. But after 20 seconds, the breath synced with my steps. A soft inhale every time I lifted my foot, a slow exhale every time I put it down. I stopped walking. The breathing didn't. I listened hard, felt the hairs rise on my arms. Close. Too close. Microscopically close. I pulled the radio off my vest and held it away from me. The breathing grew clearer, louder. Not fast. Not panicked. Just deliberate. Like someone studying me through the speaker. I keyed up. Dispatch, this is Ranger 1. I'm getting some interference. Anyone transmitting? Static. Another breath. Longer this time. Wet. Heavy. I should have turned back. Any sane person would have. But sanity is a luxury we pretend Rangers have, even when we've been cracked in half by things we can't describe. Protocol said to investigate anomalies. And guilt. Guilt is heavier than fear. It pushes you forward even when every nerve in your body is begging you to run. I kept walking. The deeper I went, the more off everything felt. The air thickened like humidity without heat. A low tremor threaded through the soil. I could feel it in the bones of my boots, like something massive shifting deep underground. Then the animal stopped. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't natural. One moment there were birds and insects and the usual chorus of forest life. The next, absolute stillness. I froze. It was the same kind of silence Mina disappeared into, the same suffocating, unnatural muteness, like the trees were holding their breath, like the entire forest was listening. I whispered her name before I could stop myself. Not Mina. The name of the man who vanished last week. Andre McCallum, 42, experienced hiker, knew the terrain better than half my team. He radioed a status check at 1842, said he was close to the old mining road and heading out soon. His last words, clean, calm, confident, were, "Yeah, I see the truck. Shift's almost over. Then the transmission cut, and he never came home. I kept walking as the quiet thickened around me, pressing against my skull. My heartbeat felt too loud, like it didn't belong inside me, like it was echoing from somewhere external. My flashlight beam trembled slightly, something I blamed on hand fatigue, though deep down, I knew better. The beam cut through the dust hanging in the air, illuminating the old mining buildings ahead. Just foundations now. Rotting boards. Black windows staring like empty eye sockets. The tunnel sat beyond them, sealed by rusted steel plates welded decades ago. Every ranger knows not to mess with it, not because of danger, though God knows it's unstable, but because the Park Service gets pissed when people poke at historical sites. That's what we tell the public anyway. The truth is simpler. People hear things near that tunnel. Voices. Footsteps. Their own name whispered through solid rock. I've always rationalized it. Old structures echo. Temperature shifts create pops and ticks. Wind can sound like anything if you're tired enough. But when I approached that night, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. I felt frost burn across my cheeks. My breath plumed white even though it was early autumn. That's when I saw the footprints. They led out of the tree line, one set, heavy, staggered, and continued straight toward the steel-sealed tunnel. They were fresh, too fresh. Damp soil pressed perfectly under the weight of someone moving barefoot, not hiking boots, not trail runners. Bare feet. But the strangest part, the prints didn't sink naturally. They were too deep around the toes, like whoever made them was leaning forward, like they weren't walking so much as being pulled. I knelt down and touched one. Still warm. A sound drifted from the tunnel then, so faint I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. Someone knocking. 3 slow taps against steel. I drew my sidearm and aimed at the door. Not protocol, not standard, but the silence behind me felt like a closed fist. The whole forest was bracing for something. I approached slowly, boots crunching gravel. Each step felt heavier, like gravity thickened with every foot I moved closer. My breath fogged the beam of my flashlight. The knocking came again, only this time it wasn't from behind the steel. It was from inside my radio. Tap, tap, tap. I lifted the radio closer to my ear, then a voice, so quiet it was almost a vibration, whispered, "Shifts." Almost over, Andre's voice, but stretched, warped, like it was pulled through water. And behind his voice, something else breathing, something that didn't match human cadence. My throat tightened. Flashbacks of Mina clawed up my spine. Her last words, the silence before, the way the trees seemed to lean in. I did something stupid then, probably the most reckless thing I've done in my career. I touched the steel door. The moment my fingers brushed the metal, I felt movement behind it, soft, slow, deliberate. Something pressing back against the other side, mirroring where my hand rested. Then from the forest behind me, a voice called out. My voice. "Hey, shift's almost over. You coming back?" I turned so fast my neck cracked. There, standing about 30 yards away, was me, or something that was the shape of me. It stood perfectly still, not breathing, not blinking. Just a silhouette the exact height and build as mine, seen up, head tilted slightly like it was studying me. Then it smiled. Not with my mouth. With something stretched tight under the skin, unnatural, too wide. The forest remained silent, so silent I could hear my own pulse hammering in my teeth. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And the thing wearing my shape whispered again, this time in the exact tone Andre used before he vanished. "Shifts almost over." The steel behind me shuddered. Something inside pushing outward. I stepped back, torn between the tunnel and the thing standing beneath the trees when the ground vibrated hard enough to knock dust loose from the beam overhead. The vibration traveled up my legs like a living thing, coiling around my spine. My radio hissed, cracked, and then a second voice spoke. A woman's, soft, panicked. "Help me. Please, I can't see." Mina. My vision blurred. My stomach dropped. For the first time in years, I felt real. Primal fear. Not the professional kind you manage with training, but the kind that strips you down to instinct. I raised my flashlight toward the silhouette wearing my form. It didn't flinch from the light. It didn't hide. It simply watched, and then took one step toward me, and another, and another. Its legs moved like a puppet's, jerky, incorrect angles, too fast. I backed up until my shoulder blades hit the cold steel of the tunnel door. Something behind the metal exhaled. End of section 1. Say continue or stop. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just reacted, some buried survival instinct snapping awake. I pushed off the steel door hard enough to send a metallic groan echoing through the shaft behind me. The creature, my shape, my stance, my uniform, but not me, stopped mid-stride like it was confused by my sudden motion. Its head jerked a few degrees to the left, listening with the predator's stillness. Something behind the steel door mirrored the motion, shifting its weight against the metal with a slow drag. I felt the vibration crawl across my spine. 2 threats. One in front, one behind. No good choices. My radio crackled again. A faint breath. Then a whisper that sounded half submerged in static, Mina's voice but broken like she was speaking with a mouthful of river water. "Don't. Turn your back." I had no idea which direction she meant. The forest. The tunnel. The thing wearing my outline. I was surrounded by mirrors of my own fear. The imitation ranger took another step toward me, its boots sinking deeper than they should into the soil, as if something heavier was puppeting it from inside. Its arms hung loose, shoulders wrong. Its torso swayed like it was being balanced by a puppeteer with trembling hands. It spoke again, but this time the voice wasn't mine or Andre's. Shifts almost over. The last word stretched like sinew tearing. I raised my flashlight higher, shining it directly into the thing's face, and finally it reacted. Not the way a person would, not with flinching or shielding. Instead, its skin tightened violently, pulling back as if the light burned some invisible membrane beneath. Its features shifted, rearranged, flickered through shapes like someone cycling through masks too fast to settle on one. For 1 second, one impossible, nauseating second, it wore Mina's face. Her eyes wide, her mouth open in silent terror, then gone. That broke something in me. I squeezed my flashlight until the plastic creaked and shouted, my first real sound since the silence fell, "Stay back!" The thing cocked its head again, almost curious, almost amused. Then it stopped mimicking movement altogether. And instead, it listened. Not to me, to the tunnel. The ground trembled again, deeper this time. The steel behind me flexed inward, as though something huge pressed against it from the other side. A hollow ring echoed, metal straining. The imitation ranger lifted its chin, and for the first time I realized something terrifying. It wasn't here to hunt me. It was here to watch the tunnel, to see if the door would hold. The air thinned, as though something was sucking oxygen deep underground. My ears popped. A deep, subsonic vibration rolled through my ribs. The voice on the radio, Mina's voice, rose again, desperate, distorted. Don't let it out. A sharp metallic snap cracked behind me. One of the bolts holding the steel plating sheared in half, flew off, hit the ground with a sound far too loud in the death-still forest. The imitation ranger twitched like a startled deer. I didn't wait. I ran. I don't know how I managed it, my boots slipping on gravel, like my breath burning in my throat. But some fading fragment of self-preservation shoved me down the old mining road faster than I thought my body still could move. My flashlight beam jerked wildly through the trees. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not the hasty, stumbling ones of a person giving chase. These were rhythmic, deliberate, matching pace with me exactly, like an echo of my own movements. I didn't dare look back. The air around me changed again, heat this time, sudden and suffocating. Warm gusts of wind cut through patches of icy cold. Every breath tasted like burnt hair and wet stone. The forest felt diseased. Wrong. 10 yards ahead, the trail bent left. That's when I finally made the mistake of turning my head. The imitation ranger wasn't running. It was gliding. Its boots hovered inches above the dirt, moving in perfect synchronization with me, like a shadow cast too far from its source. Its face was slack now, featureless, almost liquid, the shape of a head without details, a mockery of a person, its arms dragged behind it like dead weight. But its chest rose and fell with slow, calculated breaths, not synced to running, synced to me. I could feel its inhale before mine, feel its exhale push against my shoulder blades. I choked on panic. My legs nearly buckled. I stumbled into the bend in the road and skidded to a stop so violently my knees struck the ground, because someone was standing in the middle of the path. Someone I recognized, Andre McCallum, or what was left of him. His clothes were torn, his skin pale, stretched thin over bones that looked longer than they should have been. His eyes were huge, pupils dilated until only a thin ring of iris remained. His mouth hung open like he'd forgotten how to close it, and he was facing the woods, not me. Arms slack, head tilted forward very slightly like he'd been listening for someone. I whispered his name. It came out like a broken plea. Andre, he didn't turn, didn't blink, didn't breathe. But his skin twitched just once like something underneath shifted. The imitation ranger behind me stopped moving. The air froze, caught between me and whatever stood on the path. Then, very slowly, Andre's head rotated toward me. Not turned, rotated, too smooth, too complete. Like the vertebrae had been replaced with a hinge. His stare locked onto mine, and in that moment, I felt something press into my mind. Cold, searching, almost curious. He raised one hand, fingers trembling, pointing past me. Not at the shadow behind me, at the tunnel. A sound broke the paralysis. The distant metallic scream of another bolt snapping loose. A thunderous clang rolled through the forest, vibrating through the soil like a heartbeat underground. Andre's lips moved. At first, nothing came out. Then, in a voice stripped raw, "You shouldn't have touched it." My blood iced. The imitation ranger behind me took one deliberate step forward, and I heard gravel grind under its boots for the first time. It wasn't gliding anymore. It was preparing. Andre's body jerked violently, like a puppet yanked by tangled strings. His spine arched backward with a sickening crack, his limbs twisted in opposite directions, his jaw unhinged, and he screamed. Not a human scream. Not anything I ever want to hear again. It came from deep inside him, layered, discordant, like multiple voices trying to force themselves through one throat. The imitation ranger lunged. I dove sideways into the trees. Branches slashed my arms, roots caught my boots. I scrambled up a slope thick with ferns, using both hands, almost crawling. My breath tore through the quiet like a wounded animal. The forest erupted. Andre's body thrashed. The thing in my shape followed so close behind me, I could hear the fabric of the uniform stretching as its limbs elongated in pursuit. The silence from earlier shattered, replaced by the cacophony of something massive straining against steel deep underground. Halfway up the hill, my boots slid on loose pine needles. I crashed against a fallen log, rolled, and hit the ground hard enough to knock my vision sideways. I blinked through the dizziness. Below me, the path was empty. Andre was gone. The imitation ranger was gone. The forest was silent again, but not empty, not waiting, not listening. Now it was hiding something. I forced myself upright, gripping the bark for balance, panting hard enough to taste iron. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing, whispering. Dozens of whispers, layered over each other, rising from the soil beneath me. They were saying my name. The ground pulsed beneath my boots like something alive was breathing inches under the soil. The whispers rose and fell in waves. My name stretched, warped, broken into different tones, different pitches. Some were childlike. Others sounded old, brittle, like wind moving through a skull. And some sounded like Mina. I staggered back, nearly tripping over a root as the earth shivered again. For a moment I swore I felt fingers press lightly against the bottom of my boot, as if something was testing the weight of me, or trying to push upward. I stepped away fast. My hand went to my sidearm on instinct, though I already knew it wouldn't matter. What was I going to do? Shoot the ground? Shoot the voices? Shoot the version of myself that had no business existing? The forest around me stayed unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, no movement. It felt like I'd stepped into the world between heartbeats. I forced myself to breathe slow, controlled, the way we're trained to break panic before it spirals. But the air tasted wrong, metallic, cold, like exhaled breath trapped underground for decades suddenly leaking into the open. I needed to get out of the trees, get to the truck, radio backup, anything that resembled reality. I moved uphill, keeping my back to a rock outcrop so nothing could approach from behind. The whispers thinned as I climbed, dissolving into a low hum that vibrated inside my teeth. Above me, the ridge was only 30 yards away. If I could get up there, I'd have a view of the old mining road. Maybe even see if the tunnel door had given way. But halfway up, the temperature dropped again, this time so sharply I gasped. Frost bloomed across the rock next to me, crawling outward in branching veins. I watched it spread in seconds, white fractals claiming the surface like some time-lapse experiment. Then I felt the cold behind me. Not air temperature, pressure, a presence. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe fear, maybe some primal understanding that looking directly at whatever stood behind me would break something in my mind permanently. But I listened. At first, nothing. Then, soft, deliberate inhaling. It was right at the base of my skull, like something tall was leaning down to breathe onto my neck. The cold deepened, burrowing between my vertebrae. The breath smelled like wet stone, earth, and something sweetly rotten, like flowers left to decay in a closed room. My stomach clenched. Slowly the breath moved closer to my left ear. Then it spoke, not in words, in imitation. It copied my breathing. Every rise and fall of my chest, every quickening tremor, every shallow panic inhale, perfectly synced, perfectly mirrored, like it was trying to feel the breath from the inside. I stiffened, gripping the rock in front of me. Then the mimicry changed. With a sound like fabric stretching, the breathing behind me became deeper, longer. The exhale hot and moist against my ear, humid enough to fog my skin. It wasn't copying anymore. It was testing. I couldn't help it. I spun around, and for a moment, I saw nothing. Just empty trees. Frost glittering on bark. My own fogging breath. But the cold remained. Concentrated. Focused. Then a figure emerged between two pines. At first I thought it was Andre again. Same torn clothes, same posture, arms dangling like heavy ropes. But as it stepped into the faint moonlight slipping through the canopy, I understood something awful. It wasn't Andre. It wasn't the imitation ranger either. It was neither and both and something else entirely. A shape adjusting itself. Learning. Combining. For a sickening moment, its outline looked like Mina's height. Then it stretched taller, thinning its limbs, its joints snapping in and out of place like it was flipping through possibilities. Searching for the perfect shape. It took one step toward me. The ground hissed where its foot touched, soil shrinking away from the contact. Then it stopped shifting, and it wore a new face. Not mine, not Andre's, not Mina's. Someone older, a ranger I hadn't thought about in years. Mark Redden, disappeared 12 years ago, left for a routine sweep, never came back. They found his boots neatly placed on a rock 2 miles from the trail, nothing else. Now his face, sunken, waxy, eyes too wet, too wide, hung from the shape standing before me. My body went rigid, because this wasn't just a creature mimicking what it saw. It had memory, history, years. It knew the missing, and it knew me. The mark thing opened its mouth and let out a sound that wasn't a voice at all. It was wet gravel, sliding stone, something inhaling in reverse. Then it shuddered, and like a glitch in reality, its face fractured into dozens of faces, overlapping, flickering too fast for my brain to process. So many rangers, so many hikers. Faces I recognized from old case files, missing persons bulletins, photos printed on weatherproof posters stapled to trailheads. All the vanished, all the lost, worn by one entity. I broke. Not physically, mentally. Something gave inside me with an audible snap in my mind. I stumbled backward, heel catching on a rock, and fell hard on my side. The creature didn't advance. It simply tilted its head, watching me come undone, as though cataloging the reaction. Then it whispered, not in any of the voices it had imitated, in my mother's voice. Come home. I clamped both hands over my ears like a child trying to smother thunder. But the voice was inside my skull now, vibrating through the inner bones, ricocheting off thoughts like sonar. Come home, come home, come home. I crawled to my feet, slipping, half sobbing, half grunting, and bolted up the last stretch of the ridge. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. Branches tore at my sleeves, my neck, my face. I didn't feel any of it. I just needed height. Distance. Anything. I reached the ridge breathless and shaking. Below me lay the old mining road, the tunnel entrance barely visible through the thinning trees. The steel door no longer stood intact. It bulged outward. Each steel plate bent as if pushed by tremendous weight from within. 2 bolts were gone. The weld seams glowed faintly, red, then white, then red again, like metal heated from the wrong side. Something inside the tunnel shifted, a deep, cavernous thud that reverberated through the ridge, rattling the rocks under my boots. Then a voice crawled out of the tunnel, not through air, through the earth, through the radio clipped to my vest, a gurgled sound. Then, he's listening. I ripped the radio off my vest and hurled it down slope. It shattered on a rock and fell silent. But the message lingered, echoing behind my ribs. He's listening. I didn't want to know who he was, or if that voice belonged to Mina, or someone deeper lost in the dark. I scanned the tree line desperately. No sign of the creature, no sound. Only the bending steel ahead and the oppressive quiet behind. I needed to reach the truck. I needed to get off this road. Moving slow, careful not to break the fragile silence, I started descending the opposite side of the ridge. The woods here were denser, darker, the air heavy with wet bark and something else, like sulfur and old sweat. But halfway down I froze, because there were footprints in the soil, a single line of them, deep, barefoot, dragged. And they weren't leading away from the tunnel, they were leading toward me, fresh, still settling, still warm. My pulse slammed against my skull, and beneath it another sound rose faintly from below. Not whispers, not breathing, humming. A low, tuneless, broken hum, like someone trying to remember a song they never learned. Then a voice, soft female trembling, floated up through the trees. Don't follow the song. My lungs locked, not because of the warning itself, but because that was Mina's voice. And this time she wasn't whispering through a radio, she was whispering through the forest itself. Mina's voice seeped through the trees like mist, thin, trembling, barely louder than my own breath. I stopped so suddenly the soil shifted under my boots. The footprints in front of me, bare, deep, dragging, seemed to pulse with the echo of her warning. Don't follow the song. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth to call her name, but no sound came out. My voice felt trapped somewhere behind my sternum, like pressed down by the same cold pressure that had stalked me since the tunnel. I forced myself to step back, just one step. The humming below shifted instantly, as if responding to my movement. It grew sharper, closer, not louder, just nearer, like it bent distance instead of volume. I crouched low behind a rotting log, trying desperately to steady my breathing. But it didn't matter. The humming matched the rhythm of my breath again. Every inhale, every exhale, like it had learned me, mapped me, possessed a blueprint of my lungs. Through the trees, the footprints continued down toward a darker part of the slope. I followed them with my eyes, not my feet. Drag marks breaking the soil, toes digging grooves like whoever made them had to be pulled forward, or compelled. The humming warped then, shifting pitch, sliding into something that almost resembled a human voice humming a lullaby. There was no melody, just the awful attempt at one. Notes that didn't exist, vibrating wrong inside the air, inside my skull. My heart jackhammered. Sweat froze on my wrists. Don't follow the song, she'd said, which meant she knew it. She'd heard it. She'd followed it once. I kept perfectly still, gripping the handle of my sidearm so hard my knuckles felt like they might crack. I didn't draw it. Not yet. Not unless the thing making that sound decided to climb the slope. A crunch of branches below made me flinch. Someone or something was approaching. Not fast, not stealthy, just moving, heavy, uneven, each step punctuated by that sickening drag. Then a voice rose under the humming. At first I thought it was Mina. My breath caught. But no. This voice was wrong from the first syllable. Low, wet, like vocal cords swollen with water. It tried speaking in English, but the words came broken, fractured. Members. I felt the sweat on my back go ice cold. The thing wasn't humming to itself. It was humming to me, drawing me, calling me, testing what part of me would respond. I stayed crouched, barely breathing, until the creature, or whatever wore those footprints, came into view through a thin gap between the trees. It was not Andre. It was not the imitation ranger. It wasn't even human anymore. The figure stumbled into sight, jerking forward with steps that bent its legs at impossible angles. Its spine curved backward, ribs visible under skin stretched too tight, like something inside had grown too large for its shell. Its arms hung long, far too long, fingertips dragging through the leaves. But its face was the worst part, not because it was monstrous, but because it was almost human. A mixture, a blend, a composite of features from faces I recognized and faces I didn't. Mina's cheekbone, Andre's brow, Mark Redden's mouth, a missing hiker's chin, merged, melted, stitched into one expressionless mask. The humming came from its throat, vibrating the skin of its neck like a distended drum. I clamped my jaw shut so hard I felt my molars grind. The creature stopped only 10 yards below me. Its head snapped toward my hiding spot, and it fell silent. My pulse roared in my ears. Slowly the thing inhaled a deep, wet, rattling breath, and the air around me thinned instantly. My heartbeat stumbled, skipping 2 beats before slamming painfully back into rhythm. Then it spoke with one of the voices it carried. My voice. Don't hide. The way it said it, flat, cold, instructional, made something primal inside me recoil. It wasn't trying to lure me. It wasn't trying to pretend to be me. It was giving me an order. I pressed my back harder against the log, squeezing myself deeper into the shadow it cast. The thing inhaled again, this time faster, with urgency, like a predator picking up scent. I couldn't stay there. If it reached the ridge, I had nowhere left to run. I scanned the slope. To my right, the forest thickened into underbrush, too dense to move quickly. To my left, the hill dropped into a gully filled with fallen trees and sharp rocks. But straight behind me, a narrow limestone outcrop split open into a small crevice. Deep, maybe, dark enough to hide in, or trap me. But the creature was turning now, slowly, head tilting upward, nostrils flaring, learning the air, learning me. Its limbs tightened like it was preparing to climb. I didn't have a choice. Keeping as low as possible, I began sliding backward toward the crevice. Each movement deliberate, timed with the creature's breath so the rustle of leaves wouldn't give me away. The humming returned, louder, sharper, vibrating the soil. The creature jerked its head violently from side to side, searching. I slipped into the crevice. The temperature dropped instantly. The air was thick, stale, smelling of old stone and damp rot. My shoulders scraped the rock walls. The space was barely wider than my body. I wedged myself deeper until the forest outside blurred into a strip of moonlit blue. My breath hitched. I forced myself to stop. Slow breaths, silent breaths. The creature dragged itself up the slope with startling speed, the humming growing erratic, frantic. I heard its long limbs scraping bark, its feet slapping mud. Then its head rose into view directly outside the crevice. Its face hung inches from the rock, listening, breathing. I didn't dare blink. Its mouth twitched open, not smiling, smelling. A long string of saliva stretched from its lip and hit the stone. It sniffed once, twice. The humming faltered. Then it said in the voice of someone I hadn't heard in 20 years. My father. Come out. My entire body recoiled. Not just from fear, from rage, from violation. Its voice cracked. Repeated the line, this time doubled with my mother's voice layered beneath it. Come out. Come out. I dug my nails into the stone to keep from screaming. The thing pressed closer, its forehead scraping the opening of the crevice, skin peeling slightly as it forced itself nearer. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the woods, a sound rang out. A metallic bang. A second. A third. The creature froze instantly. The tunnel. More bolts giving way. Its head jerked away from me so fast the sound was like bone snapping. Without another word or sound, it fled downhill, limbs splaying wildly as it tore through the undergrowth. I stayed in the crevice, trembling so hard dust sifted down from the rock above me. The forest remained silent. But somewhere underground a new noise grew. Not bolts this time. Breathing. Huge. Deep. Awakening. I waited 5 minutes. Maybe 10. I don't know. Time had warped into something elastic. Finally, when the distant sound stopped, I crawled out of the crevice, legs almost too numb to hold me. I needed to reach the truck. I needed distance. I needed to pretend any of this still resembled reality. But the moment I stepped onto the ridge again, the forest changed. Not the temperature, not the air, the shadows. They had shifted, lengthened, angled toward the tunnel as if pulled by gravity, and down on the old mining road, the steel door was now half off its hinges. Something had pushed it outward nearly a foot. A draft of warm air rolled past me, carrying the smell of wet fur and metallic blood. Then beneath the ridge, a voice drifted up, soft, weak, almost pleading. Help me. I can't see. Please, don't let him, Mina. Not through radio, not through echoes, directly from inside the open shaft. My knees weakened, because there was only one way she could be calling from there. She had been inside the tunnel all along. And now with the door partially open, she wasn't alone. Mina's voice was faint, but real. It floated up the slope in trembling fragments, as if torn apart by the warm air spilling from the breached tunnel. The smell rising with it was worse than anything I'd encountered in my years as a ranger. Rot mixed with wet animal musk, iron, and something sulfurous that stung the back of my throat. I wanted to call out to her, but something deeper, older, warned me not to. Instead, I crouched along the ridge, scanning the tree line and the slope below for any sign of movement. The creature, the composite thing, was nowhere in sight, but its absence felt worse than its presence, like it wasn't gone, just waiting. The steel door at the tunnel entrance hung crooked, the bottom corner bent outward in a smooth arc. Not dented, not slammed, pulled. A thin seam of darkness yawned behind the gap. It looked like an inhale made visible. Warm air pushed upward from the breach in soft, rhythmic gusts like breath. Mina's voice trembled again, closer this time, as if she'd moved right beneath the opening. "He's awake. Don't let him." Her words cut off in a choking gasp. I couldn't stop myself. I shouted her name. "Mina." My voice echoed like a foreign sound in that dead forest. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I heard her respond, not with words, with a quick, sharp inhale. A gasp of recognition. Terror. Hope. Then something else answered, a deep, concussive thud from inside the tunnel. The sound of something massive shifting its weight. Rock dust drifted out of the breached seam like exhaled ash. I took a cautious step down the slope, then another. The ridge felt too exposed, the forest too silent. The idea of moving toward the tunnel felt like willingly walking into a grave. But every instinct I had screamed that if Mina was alive, truly alive, I couldn't abandon her again. The guilt from her disappearance hadn't just lived inside me. It had rewritten me. The slope descended steeply. My boots slipped on loose soil. Every few steps I had to grab tree roots to keep from sliding. The tunnel's mouth grew larger. The bent steel gleamed weakly in the pale moonlight. By the time I reached the old mining road, the air was thick with humidity and the scent of old stone. The warm wind pouring from the tunnel brushed against my face like breath. Steady, probing, aware. I raised my flashlight. The beam illuminated the steel door just enough to show the gap, 12 inches wide at the bottom, maybe 8 at the top. Something had forced its hands into the seams and pulled outward with methodical, terrible strength. "Mina," I whispered, leaning just close enough to the gap for my voice to carry inside. "If you can hear me, answer." Silence. Then, "Don't. Come down." Her voice was wrong, not just weak, misaligned, like two versions of her speaking a split second apart, echoing from different depths. I froze, every hair on my body bristling. "Mina, what's in there with you?" A scraping sound answered, a long, slow drag across stone, then a second scraping, parallel, like two hands or claws. The warm wind thickened, carrying the smell of wet fur and a faint, copper sweetness. My stomach twisted violently. I crouched lower, angling my flashlight toward the interior. The beam caught nothing but darkness. Complete, unnatural darkness. A darkness that didn't behave like absence of light. It absorbed the beam, thinned it, swallowed it. The air inside shimmered as though dense with humidity or heat or movement. Then from deep within that impossible black, a single eye opened. Not human, not animal. A spherical glow, faint as a dying ember, yet piercing in its stillness. It didn't blink, didn't recoil from the light. It simply looked at me, and I knew, instantly, the factories. This wasn't the creature that mimicked the Rangers. This wasn't the thing wearing faces. This was the thing behind it, the source, the cause, the thing the mimic fled toward, the thing that lived in the tunnel, the thing Mina had warned me about. A pressure wave pushed outward, soft but enormous. My flashlight flickered. The ground beneath my boots vibrated with a slow heartbeat-like rhythm. Then something moved behind the eye. Something large shifting in the tunnel. Massive limbs adjusting, stone cracking. Mina's voice drifted out again, but this time it sounded like it was being pushed through a throat that wasn't hers. "He sees you." I stumbled back too fast, lost my footing, and hit the gravel hard. Pain flared up my spine. I scrambled backward on all fours as the warm wind intensified, pulsing in short bursts. The eye in the darkness narrowed. Then the bent steel door groaned, slowly, agonizingly, as something pressed against it from the inside. The metal buckled outward an inch, then another. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling up the mining road. My flashlight jittered wildly across the trees. Every shadow looked like a person waiting to step forward. But when the next metallic shriek cut through the forest, I realized I wasn't alone. Something moved in the trees to my left. A shape, tall, uneven, jerky in its movement. Not the thing in the tunnel. The mimic. Its limbs swung in unnatural arcs as it descended through the underbrush, moving with horrifying familiarity. My gait, my posture, my balance, it was wearing me again. But not the me standing here, another me, a version that looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, uniform torn, a smear of blood on the collar, boots muddy, a version of me that hadn't yet happened, but would, a prediction, a memory, a warning. I backed away instinctively. The mimic stepped onto the mining road and froze, head cocked at an angle a human neck couldn't bend. Then, in my own tired future voice, it whispered, "You left her." My breath caught. The thing inside the tunnel struck the steel again, a deep, world-shaking impact that sent birds exploding out of distant trees. The mimic stared directly into my eyes. "You left her." Again. Terror clawed at my throat. My legs moved before my mind did. I turned and sprinted up the mining road, gravel spraying under my boots. The air pulsed behind me. Trees contorted in the corners of my vision. I didn't look back. I refused to look back. But I heard footsteps behind me matching mine perfectly, half a second delayed, as if I were chasing myself. The forest blurred. The sky wavered. The silence deepened until my heartbeat sounded like a drum inside a coffin. The truck came into view through the trees, its reflective stripe catching the light. I sprinted harder, harder. Just a few more yards, a hand grabbed my ankle, not physically, not skin, not fingers. A cold pressure, invisible. Pulling backward like gravity itself had shifted. I fell forward onto the gravel, tearing my palms open. I clawed the dirt, dragging myself inch by inch. The pressure increased. Something behind me inhaled, a vast, cavernous breath that pulled leaves toward the tunnel, pulled sound, pulled heat, pulled me. No. I pushed up with everything I had. I lunged the last 2 yards and slammed into the side of the truck so hard it knocked the wind out of me. The pressure vanished instantly, like a hand letting go. I threw myself into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine refused. Click, click, click. Headlights flickered. Radio crackled. Then, through the static, "He's not done." Mina's voice. Weak. Braking. Slip-sliding into something not human. I turned the key again, and the engine roared to life. Gravel spat behind the tires as I tore up the road. Branches clawed the sides. My breath heaved. My vision blurred. In the rearview mirror, at the far edge of the mining road, the mimic stood watching. Beside it, a second silhouette, huge, hunched, emerging from the tunnel, eyes glowing like coals in a furnace. The forest swallowed them both as the truck climbed the ridge. I didn't stop driving, didn't look back again, didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, the entrance to the old mining road was sealed off with federal tape and unmarked vehicles. They didn't ask me what happened. They already knew, or didn't want to. And now, as I record this, the forest outside my cabin is silent. Not natural quiet. Predatory silence. The same silence that came before Mina vanished. Before Andre vanished. Before the door in the mountain began to open. I don't know if the mimic is watching me. I don't know if he is awake inside the shaft. I don't know what part of me the forest plans to take next. But I do know one thing. The shift never ended. Not for any of us. And the forest is listening. Always. The night I locked myself inside the watchtower began with a feeling I still can't explain. Something small, something quiet, something that touched me before anything else did. It was the kind of unease that arrives without sound or shape, sliding under the door of your mind long before your senses catch up. I didn't understand it then, not fully, but looking back now, I think that was the moment the forest first reached for me. My name is Caleb. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent more than a decade serving as a ranger in the Bitterroot region of western Montana. I've lived through storms that tore the sky open, fires that swallowed whole valleys, and nights when the cold crawled into my bones like something with purpose. But nothing ever gripped me the way the stories I'm about to tell you did. The forest where I work isn't the kind of place people stumble into. It doesn't have scenic overlooks with polished railings or paved roads for casual wanderers. My station is surrounded by jagged ravines, dense stands of lodgepole pine, and forgotten logging trails that twist like old scars. The nearest town, a place everyone just calls Dalton Flats, sits 30 miles away. The people there grow quiet when the conversation drifts toward the deeper woods. Not because they're superstitious, not exactly, but because they've lived long enough to know that sometimes the forest notices you back. They call the dense central region the Old Stretch, and even the hunters don't go there unless they must. During my first year, I laughed when I heard the locals tell stories about strange things moving through the timber, things too big to be elk, too upright to be bear. I used to think rural isolation could make anyone hear footsteps that weren't there, or imagine silhouettes between the trees. I told myself, the woods were still just woods, no matter how dark or vast they were. But that changed the night I responded to the call from the abandoned mining trail. That night, the sky had gone a strange color, neither dark nor light, the way it looks when snow is coming, but the clouds can't decide if they're ready to release it. I remember stepping out of my truck and seeing the air pulse with cold. My radio had crackled earlier with a report from a hiker who claimed she heard someone yelling near the old caves at the end of the trail. The caller didn't leave her name and didn't answer when dispatch asked follow-up questions. She just said the screaming didn't sound human, and then the line cut. I was the closest ranger, so the call fell to me. The mining trail is narrow and curls upward between cliffs. As I hiked in, my boots crushed thin sheets of ice that had formed over muddy patches. The silence had weight. Every footstep felt like an intrusion. I kept glancing over my shoulder even though there was no reason to. I told myself it was just the cold, that my nerves were stretched thin from the long week. But even then, I knew I was lying to myself. About a mile in, I smelled something sharp in the air, like copper warmed by the sun. It wasn't blood exactly, but it reminded me of it. I tried to steady my breathing as I pushed forward. The scent drifted in and out with the wind, as if circling me, testing how close it could get. When I reached the area near the cave entrance, the temperature dropped so fast it stole my breath. My flashlight beam hit the rock walls, making them look wet, even though the stone was dry. I called out, announcing myself, repeating standard search and rescue protocol. My voice bounced back in fragments, warped by the contours of the cave mouth. No response. Then came the sound, soft at first, like two stones tapping together. Tap, tap, slow, deliberate. It wasn't coming from inside the cave. It was coming from the tree line behind me. I froze, turning just my head at first, my breath forming thin ribbons of vapor that drifted sideways. The forest was dense, silent, wrong in some essential way. When the tapping came again, louder this time, it echoed down the ravine. Something in me whispered to leave, to turn around, to trust the instinct rising like fire beneath my sternum. But I'd always believed fear was a tool, not a command. I'd taught younger rangers that same philosophy, so I forced myself to stay still long enough to assess what could be making the sound. Then I saw movement, just a flicker at first, something tall shifting between two pines. The outlines didn't make sense. Too long in one direction, too thick in another. It leaned its weight as if studying me, and for a moment I felt a pressure in the air, like whatever it was had exhaled and the forest held its breath with me. I stepped backward toward the cave without taking my eyes off the tree line. The tapping stopped. The thing shifted, and I heard a low, rumbling groan. Something that wasn't language but carried intention. I didn't run. Maybe I should have, but something told me that turning my back would end badly. Instead, I slowly retreated into the cave entrance. The darkness swallowed my light in a way caves shouldn't. My beam reached only a few feet before fading into thick blackness. Behind me, something stepped closer. The pine needles crunched under weight, far heavier than any man's. My breath came out in one harsh gasp, and for a second the world narrowed to my heartbeat. Then a scream tore down the ravine. It sounded human, but not fully. Like someone in agony trying to force their voice into words they didn't know how to form. The pitch was so high it scraped down my spine. I swung my light toward the direction of the scream. Nothing. Just trees. Just shadows. But the thing in the trees moved again, and this time I saw the shape clearly enough to understand one thing. Whatever it wasn't alone. 2 shapes, then 3. All tall, all slightly hunched, all watching me. A wave of dizziness swept through me, hot and cold at once. I stumbled deeper in the cave without remembering the steps I took. The tapping returned, louder now, many taps overlapping. My throat went dry. I radioed dispatch, but all I got was static, thick, heavy static, like someone breathing against the frequency. I should have stayed outside, but instinct pushed me inward. Maybe it was fear, maybe desperation, maybe both, but something felt safer in the stone-dark throat of that cave than seeing what was gathering in the trees. And as I moved deeper, the air changed. The copper scent grew stronger. My hand brushed the cave wall, and the rock felt warm, too warm, as if it had absorbed heat from something living. My flashlight flickered. I slapped the side of it, but the beam kept dimming, shrinking, until it was barely aglow on the floor. I stopped walking and listened. The tapping had stopped, but the silence that replaced it felt alive. Then something scraped across the floor behind me, long, slow, like claws or talons dragging along stone. I spun, shining the dying beam down the tunnel, expecting eyes, teeth, something. But there was nothing there except the narrowing passage and a few loose rocks. Then the sound came again, closer. My pulse hammered in my throat. The rational part of me tried to argue. Rocks fall, caves shift, animals explore dark places, but the instinctual part, the part older than training or reason, screamed that something was following me. The flashlight gave one last flicker and died. Darkness swallowed me whole. My breath echoed off the walls, each inhale thin, uneven. I reached for the backup flashlight on my belt, but my hand shook so violently I dropped it before turning it on. It hit the ground, bounced, and rolled somewhere behind me, out of reach. I crouched, feeling the cold stone with my palms, trying to find it. But before my fingers brushed anything, a soft exhale sounded inches from my ear. I jerked away so fast I scraped my shoulder on the rock. My body pressed against the cave wall, every muscle locked. I couldn't hear footsteps. I couldn't hear breathing, but something was there. I could feel its presence, like heat, like pressure, like intention. A faint tremor passed through the stone beneath my feet, as if something enormous had shifted deeper in the cave. And then in the distance I heard a low, resonant call, long, sorrowful, almost mournful. It echoed down the tunnel until it vibrated through my ribs. That was the first night I realized the forest wasn't just a place. It was an inheritance of something older, something patient, something that knew we were temporary. I backed out of that cave in total darkness, step by step, never taking my mind off the thing I felt behind me, even though I couldn't see it. When I finally reached the open air again, the woods were silent. The shapes were gone. The tapping was gone. The scent of copper had vanished. Only the cold remained. I made it back to my truck, numb and shaking. But when I looked up toward the ridgeline, I saw something standing there, silhouetted, massive, watching. And that was only the beginning. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette on the ridgeline. Massive, unmoving, staring. I kept replaying the cold shift in the air, the tapping, the way the cave swallowed the light like it was hungry. I told myself I'd imagined half of it, that exhaustion had twisted the shapes in the trees into something worse. But denial is a thin blanket in a cold room. It covers just enough to make you think you're warm, never enough to keep you alive. I didn't report what I'd seen. I wrote up the incident as unverified distress call, no subject found. I didn't mention the shadows or the copper smell or the way the forest felt aware of me. Rangers don't last long if they write things like that in official logs. I learned that early, but The absence of a report doesn't erase what happened. It only tucks it into the corners of your mind until the forest decides to pull it back out. And it did. It happened a few months later, on a night with a moon so thin it looked like a cut in the sky. The cold had a sharper edge, the kind that travels through layers of clothing and settles inside your chest. I was stationed alone in the South Watchtower, an old structure bolted into exposed rock, overlooking a deep bowl of forest where the treetops roll like an ocean frozen in time. The tower wasn't meant for comfort. It groaned when the wind hit it right, and the stairs rattled no matter how many bolts you tightened. Still, I preferred it to sleeping in the cabin at the base. At least up there, you could see the world coming. Or so I thought. That particular night, the radio was dead quiet. No calls from hikers, no smoke reports, no late-night hunters needing directions. Just the steady static of a frequency waiting for something to happen. I brewed coffee, sat at the desk, and watched the tree line move gently with the wind. Around 11, the forest went still. Completely still. Not a breeze, not a tremor, not a shift of shadow. It was like someone pressed pause on the entire valley. Even the insects stopped. The silence pressed against the glass windows so thick it felt physical. I stepped out onto the metal balcony, letting the cold hit my face. My breath came out in long, slow clouds. Something about the stillness made me hold my breath, as if exhaling too loudly might attract unwanted attention. The dark below looked heavier than usual, dense, layered. Then I heard it, a single knock on the tower door. Not a bang, not a desperate pounding, a patient, deliberate knock. 3 taps, soft, fingertips on wood. I froze where I stood. My mind split into 2 conflicting truths. Every logical part of me said nobody could be there. The nearest road was miles away, the terrain nearly impossible to cross at night, and I would have heard anyone approaching long before they reached the tower. But the taps came again, 3, evenly spaced, as if whoever or whatever was knocking wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. I moved quietly, inching toward the ladder hatch, trying to listen beneath the sound. But there was no breathing, no footsteps, no shifting of weight, just silence. Then came a 3rd set of knocks, harder this time. More a command than a request. My hand brushed the radio on my belt as instinct told me to call it in, but I paused. Who was I supposed to tell? And what words could I even string together to make sense of it? Something is knocking on the tower door, but there's no one there. That kind of report has a way of ending careers. So I crept down the metal ladder, 1 rung at a time, trying not to let the metal creak under my boots. Each step echoed too loudly in the dead stillness. When I reached the bottom level, my breath fogged in front of me like smoke. The temperature had dropped fast, unnaturally fast. I could see my breath even inside the tower. I stood at the door, hand hovering over the latch. That's when the scent hit me again. Copper. Warmed. Sharp. My stomach dropped. The cave. The shadows. The silhouettes on the ridgeline. The memory surged through me like a cold current, and instinct dragged me backward. The knocks stopped immediately. In their place, something scraped across the outside of the door, slow, deliberate, like claws tracing the edge of the wood. The sound dragged upward until it reached the window at the top of the door. I stepped farther back. Then a heavy, rhythmic breathing started on the other side. Low, guttural, animalistic, but with an awareness that made my skin crawl. Each exhale fogged the small window in perfect bursts. I held perfectly still. Then the breathing stopped. Silence. I waited, muscles locked, listening so hard my own heartbeat felt deafening. Then, 1 more knock, a single one, and a long, low groan that rose into something halfway between speech and suffering. My chest tightened so hard I thought something inside me might crack. I backed toward the ladder, ready to retreat upward, hoping whatever stood outside couldn't climb. Then something hit the door. Not a knock, a weight, a body, a massive, heavy force slammed into the wood hard enough to make the frame shake. The hinges groaned. Dust fell from the rafters. The entire structure vibrated. I scrambled up the ladder, taking the rungs too fast, slipping once and skinning my palm. I slammed the hatch shut and locked it. The banging on the door grew louder, more violent. Something dragged along the outer wall, circling the tower. The metal groaned under its weight. Then something climbed. The entire frame shuddered as the weight shifted upward, hand over hand, or whatever it used instead of hands, pulling itself toward the upper level. I stumbled back into the main room and killed the lantern. I pressed myself against the wall, forcing my breath to stay slow, quiet, invisible. Through the window, I could see nothing, just darkness. Then a shadow moved, tall, slender in a distorted way. It slid past the window, blocking out the faint starlight for a heartbeat before disappearing along the side of the tower. I prayed the bolts would hold. The creature or creatures circled, scratching, knocking, pressing against the glass. Every so often, a low growl reverberated through the metal floor, vibrating through my feet. It felt like sound wasn't the point of it. It felt like a warning or a promise. Midway through the night, the knocking turned into something else, a rhythmic thud like a fist pounding on the support beams. Then a different sound, like something tapping lightly on the window, almost playful. I forced myself not to look. Something deep inside me said that looking would be taken as invitation. Hours dragged. My limbs went numb from staying frozen in one spot. My breath stayed shallow, controlled. Every sound felt like it came from inside the tower, even when I knew it didn't. Then, just before dawn, everything stopped. The scratching, the knocking, the climbing, the growls. Silence returned, this time with the soft stir of wind moving through the trees again, like the forest took its first breath after holding it all night. I didn't move until the sun pushed a thin gold line against the horizon. Only then did I step forward, trembling, and unlock the hatch. I crept down the ladder and unlatched the door with one slow movement, bracing myself. The outside world greeted me with a familiar cold. The trees were still, the sky clearing, but the ground was covered in prints. Not human, not bear, not anything that should exist in these woods. Wide, deep, with a stride too long to be safe, and every single print faced the tower. None walked away. The forest didn't want distance, it wanted me. For a long time I just stood there on the landing, staring at those prints stamped into the frost-hardened soil. They gathered in clusters, circled the tower like wolves deciding which part of the fence looked weakest. Some were only lightly pressed, but others sank deep. So deep the frozen ground cracked around them. Whatever stood beneath my watchtower that night hadn't just lingered. It had waited. It had tested. It had thought. The sun rose slowly, but even daylight didn't make those impressions look any less wrong. I crouched beside the nearest one, measured it against my boot. My size 11 looked like a child's footprint beside it. The heel and ball were clear, but the middle section sagged unnaturally inward, as though the arch had bent under impossible weight. But the most disturbing part, the part that turned my stomach, were the toe marks. There were 5, human-like, but far too long, curved slightly, and ending in indentations that suggested something sharper than nails. I touched one of them, half expecting warmth, half terrified I'd feel a pulse beneath the soil. But it was just cold earth. Just evidence I could never report. The wind shifted and the faint copper scent drifted toward me again. Not strong, not overwhelming, just enough to let me know whatever had been here hadn't gone far. I climbed back into the tower, but not to rest. I packed. I didn't think. I didn't plan. My hands moved with urgency, driven by an instinct I no longer questioned. I needed to get off that ridge before the forest changed its mind and decided daylight was no reason to let me leave. As I loaded my rifle, a habit even though I knew it wouldn't stop something that could shake a steel tower, I glanced through the window toward the tree line, and for just a fraction of a heartbeat, I saw movement. A figure. Tall. Still. Watching. Gone before my breath left my chest. I felt something crack inside me. Some sliver of certainty I had carried for years. The certainty that the forest was knowable, chartable, understandable. I'd always walked these woods with the idea that everything had a rational explanation, even if you didn't find it right away. But that morning, staring at the tree line, I realized reason was a fragile thing. and the forest could break it without trying. I drove back down the mountain road faster than I should have. The snow had melted enough to expose patches of mud, and the tires slid more than once. But the farther I got from the tower, the easier it was to breathe, at least until I reached the base station. The door was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it before heading up the tower the night before. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. Not a drawer out of place, not a paper moved. My cot was neatly made. The radio equipment sat quietly at the desk. Everything was as I'd left it, except for one thing: a strand of pine needles on the floor, perfectly straight, laid intentionally, forming 3 parallel lines. It meant nothing to me at the time, but it sent a chill through me so deep I had to sit down to stop my legs from shaking. I swept the needles into the trash and tried to convince myself they had fallen from my jacket or boots. But fear has a way of sifting truth from convenience. Deep down, I knew they'd been placed there, arranged, observed. The forest, or something within it, had come into my space, and it had done so without making a sound. I left the station door wide open as I grabbed my bag and radio. I needed to be around people, even if just for a few minutes. Dalton Flats was 30 miles away, but the idea of being around someone, anyone, felt like a rope tossed to a drowning man. When I reached the Ranger District office, I must have looked worse than I realized, because the district supervisor took one look at me and asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't. I told him I just needed a day to rest, maybe 2. He agreed, but not before asking the question I dreaded. Anything happen up there last night? I should have said no. I should have lied cleanly. But I hesitated, half a second, barely long enough to notice, yet he noticed. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered, like he knew what silence meant. "You hear the wind play tricks at that tower," he said after a moment. "Always has." I nodded, even though I knew the wind hadn't been responsible for the knocks or the climbing or the prints in the soil. As I was leaving, he added, "If you ever hear tapping out there, don't answer it." He said it too quickly, too quietly, like someone repeating something they'd been told a long time ago but never fully believed. I paused in the doorway. Why? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the window, toward the distant tree line visible through the glass. "Old stories," he finally said, "badly told, best ignored." But the muscles in his jaw tightened just enough to betray him. He knew something, or he feared something, maybe both. I drove home with that silence lodged in my mind like a splinter. My cabin sat at the edge of the forest, built long before the district had the funding for ranger housing. I'd always loved it, the solitude, the quiet, the wooden smell that seeped from the logs during the heat of summer. But after that night, something had shifted inside those walls. Or maybe it had shifted inside me. When I walked through the door, the air felt wrong. Not cold, not hot, just occupied. Like the space held memory I hadn't given it. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the wood sounded deliberate, meaningful. I kept my bedroom door open, listening for movement. My eyes stayed fixed on the dark hallway. Hours passed. The moon moved. The forest outside whispered or groaned. I couldn't tell which. At some point, exhaustion stole my vigilance. I fell asleep fully clothed, boots still on, radio clipped to my belt like a lifeline. I dreamed of the cave. Not the outside, inside. In the dream, I woke on the cold stone floor, and something breathed somewhere behind me, warm, slow, heavy. The copper scent flooded the air like steam. When I tried to move, a hand, enormous, strong, too warm, rested on my shoulder, pinning me gently but unshakably to the ground. I didn't see the creature's face, but in the dream, I understood something it never said. You entered our place. Now we enter yours. I woke with a shout lodged in my throat, sweat running cold down my back. The radio at my hip crackled with static, loud, sharp, like someone breathing through the device. I grabbed it with trembling hands and switched frequencies. The static followed, then stopped. The house settled into silence. I sat in bed, heart pounding, listening for movement. I stayed that way until the first light of dawn crept across the floorboards. When I stood, my knees shook under me. I walked into the living room and froze. There, on the wooden floor, placed with the same unnerving precision as before, were 5 long pine needles, arranged exactly like the prints around the tower. 5, as if mimicking a foot, as if reminding me. The forest wasn't finished with me, not even close. After that night, I stopped pretending I could control anything. I stopped trusting that reason would protect me. Every morning I woke, I checked the perimeter of my cabin, my eyes sweeping the edge of the forest like it was a living, watching thing. And in truth, that's exactly what it had become. Not just trees, not just shadows, something aware, something patient, something that had cataloged every step I'd taken, every sound I'd made, every breath I'd drawn. Weeks passed. The copper scent came and went, sometimes in the air, sometimes in my dreams. And always there were signs, subtle, deliberate, impossible to rationalize. Small piles of needles, faint scratches on the wooden porch, tufts of dark fur snagged on fence posts that I never saw a creature leave. I began noticing other things too, the way my footprints disappeared into the mud faster than they should have, the way the snow seemed to settle around the tracks in unnatural symmetry, almost ceremonial. I'd follow them and find nothing, just empty forest and that oppressive, waiting silence. The rational part of me, the trained ranger, kept trying to explain it all. Wind patterns, wildlife, human pranksters. But the part of me that felt instinct knew the truth. Something watched. Something waited. Something beyond comprehension. It wasn't just the physical signs that unnerved me. It was the psychology, the creeping doubt that gnawed at my confidence. My fellow rangers noticed it. The first time one of them came by, an older man named Harris, he asked if I'd been sleeping well. I lied. I said yes. But as soon as he left, I went outside and pressed my back against the rough bark of a pine, listening to the forest. Every rustle, every snap of a branch made me flinch. I began setting traps, not to catch anything, just to know if something passed by. Motion sensors, tripwires, small cameras. The results were always empty. The evidence remained invisible, the presence intangible, and yet I could feel it. Always. One evening I drove up to the watchtower again. Part of me wanted closure. Part of me wanted confirmation that I hadn't lost my mind. I parked the truck below the ridge and hiked the familiar trail. The wind was sharp that night, whistling between the cliffs. My boots crunched against frost-hardened leaves, every sound amplified by the stillness. The tower came into view, silhouetted against the half moon. It looked quiet, abandoned, harmless, almost normal, almost inviting. I climbed the ladder slowly, hand gripping the cold metal. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. When I reached the top, I paused. The balcony swayed in the wind, groaning under my weight. The tree line stretched endlessly in every direction, a black sea of spindly shadows. I shivered, feeling the forest breathe. I decided to sit at the desk, just to stare, to wait. Part of me, a small, reckless part, wanted the knocks to return. I wanted proof. I wanted to face it head on. Hours passed. The radio crackled lightly, almost like whispers, and my eyes strained in the dark. And then it happened. A sound at the door. Not tapping, not knocking. Something heavier, solid. The tower shivered again. I froze. Slowly, impossibly, I reached for the door handle. The forest seemed to exhale with me. When I opened it, nothing moved in the balcony. The tree line was still, the wind blew in my face, and yet when I looked down, the frost on the railing had been pressed flat. A print, massive, elongated, unmistakable, stretched across the metal as if someone had stood there and watched me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. Something in me screamed to climb down and leave, but instead I stayed. I tried to rationalize, to deny, to reason. The print faded in the morning light. The forest absorbed it. The evidence disappeared as if it had never been. I came to understand something crucial that night. You can't fight it. You can't reason with it. You can't run forever. The forest isn't just a place. It's a force. It has patience. It has memory. And if it chooses, it can wait for decades, sometimes centuries, until it finds someone who will listen, who will understand its presence, who will witness it and live to tell the story. The final night, the night that broke something inside me completely, was not in the tower. It was at the old cave trail, the place where it all began. I returned there alone, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a stubborn need to face the unknown. The cave loomed before me like a black mouth, and I hesitated at the entrance. I felt it then, the same awareness, the same pressure, the same heavy exhale brushing against my back. Inside, the walls were warmer than they should have been. The copper scent filled the air, thick and undeniable. My light flickered, and in that half-second of darkness, I felt it. Something towering above me, breathing, observing. My instincts screamed to flee, but my feet moved forward. Deeper into the cave, I saw them, not all at once, but in pieces of shadow and light. Tall shapes hunched between the rocks, eyes glimmering faintly, reflecting the weak beam of my flashlight. They weren't like animals. They weren't like anything I'd studied. They were older, wiser, patient, waiting for recognition. And then one stepped forward, the tallest, the broadest. It exhaled slowly. The copper scent washed over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I stood, frozen, facing it. And it did not attack. It did not speak. It merely observed, head tilted slightly, as though testing the boundaries of my fear, measuring my understanding. I realized then, with a chilling clarity, that the forest and its creatures did not exist to terrify or destroy. They existed to witness, to hold memory, to remind us that we are small, temporary, fragile, that reason, courage, and survival are not enough to grasp the entirety of the world we inhabit. I stumbled out of that cave as dawn approached. The forest behind me was quiet, still waiting. I walked back to the truck, legs weak, lungs heavy, and when I drove away, the prints in the snow, the knocks on the tower, the piles of needles, they all remained in my mind like scars. Years have passed since that night. I still serve as a ranger, still hike the trails, still monitor the forests, but I no longer seek to conquer them, to catalog them, to understand them fully. I move with humility, with respect, with awareness that I am never alone, even in the deepest darkness, even when the forest is silent. Sometimes I hear the knocks again, in the quiet of my cabin or in the wind that slips through the trees. Sometimes the copper scent drifts past my window. And every time I remember that night in the tower, that night in the cave, that long stretch of forest where the unseen waits, patient and eternal. The lesson I carry is simple. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand, to witness, to endure, even when reason fails, even when the darkness presses against you, even when the forest seems alive with intent. And in that endurance, in that acknowledgement, there is a strange kind of reverence, an understanding that fear, like the forest, teaches more than comfort ever could. Some nights I still lock myself in the watchtower, not to hide, not to flee, but to bear witness quietly to the darkness that watches back. And in that silence, I learn more about the fragility and the strength of the human mind than any sunlight, any map, any law ever taught me. The forest never lets you forget. The forest never truly leaves. And sometimes the greatest courage is simply opening your eyes and seeing what has always been there. The night I first locked myself in the tower, terrified and alone, I thought I was a victim of circumstance. I now know I was a student. The forest, patient and eternal, taught me in whispers, in knocks, in shadows, and in coppered air. And I survived. Not because I was stronger than the fear. Not because I was smarter than the forest, but because I bore it. I faced it. And I remember, we are fragile, we are temporary, but we endure. And in enduring, we glimpse something beyond ourselves, something vast, something ancient, something that waits for us to learn the lessons it has carried for centuries. The forest will always remember me. I will always remember it. And in that remembrance, I have found a measure of peace.